A very cold and frosty start with icy stretches in places. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a dry, cold and locally icy start to the day across southwest England with bright or sunny spells in the east, but thicker cloud across Devon and Cornwall. It will also be very cold in southeast England, but there will also be plenty of sunshine and just a few coastal showers in the east. Any early brightness in the east of Wales will fade as cloudy skies develop more widely. It will stay cold, however, after an early frost for most. Northwest England will be very cold with icy stretches, especially where there is snow on the ground over the hills. Bright at first, but turning increasingly cloudy through the morning. Across into northeast England, and this will also be very cold to the start of the day here, with temperatures widely well below freezing and a risk of icy surfaces. Dry and bright though, with some sunshine. It will be a cold and frosty start in Scotland as well, but skies will generally be cloudier, especially in the west, where patchy light rain and hill snow is possible. Not quite as cold over in Northern Ireland, with generally cloudy skies and a few showery outbreaks of light rain, especially in the west of the province at times. Staying dry in most areas through the morning, with cloud increasing in the west, but staying bright or sunny further east. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening, everybody. Now, on Mark Dolan tonight, it's me, Patrick Christys. Mark Dolan has sadly lost his voice, but I spoke to his wife and she said that happily Mark Dolan has lost his voice. We're asking the question whether or not our media is too pro-lockdown. Is the term Megxit sexist? And is the word Christmas offensive? And tonight on My Patrick's Meets, the guest is one of the country's leading criminal barristers. It's Chris Daw. We'll discuss his career in the law, the fact that he's represented some of the most famous names in some of the most high-profile legal battles of our time. And in FAQs, we speak to the author of the book, How to Avoid Being a Victim of the American Healthcare System. So, do we take our NHS for granted? Plus, my brilliant panel will be reacting to the big stories of the day and tomorrow's newspaper front pages. That's all to come, ladies and gents. What's not to love? But first up, time for the news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts. Here are the headlines this hour.
A third person in the UK has tested positive for the new Omicron COVID variant. The individual is thought to have visited Westminster before leaving the country. The government has brought in a series of new measures in an attempt to curb the spread of it. From Tuesday, masks will become mandatory in shops and on public transport, and senior school children in communal areas will also have to wear face coverings. Meanwhile, travellers to the UK will need to quarantine ahead of a negative PCR test. Those who've arrived from red list countries must be tested and self-isolate for 10 days. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says despite the new regulations, there are no plans to cancel Christmas.
Given the number of mutations in this new variant, there's reason to think that it may be, and I stress the word may, that this variant may turn out to make our vaccines less effective. It may not. We just don't know enough. But as a precautionary measure, what we are doing, these measures, but also turning to the vaccination program, even if this variant turns out, and it's an if, even if it turns out to make vaccines less effective.
G7 health ministers will meet tomorrow to discuss international efforts to contain the new variant. It comes as scientists shared the first image of Omicron. It isn't yet clear whether the new strain is a cause for concern, but the President of the European Commission says we should not take any chances.
We take this Omicron variant very serious, and we know that we are now in a race against time. Why that? Because we know not all about this variant, but it is a variant of concern. And the scientists and manufacturers need 2 to 3 weeks to have a full picture about the quality of the mutations of this Omicron variant.
France has called for Britain to allow a clear legal path for seeking asylum in the UK amid emergency talks on migrants crossing the Channel. European leaders met in Calais today to discuss the ongoing crisis. Home Secretary Priti Patel was deliberately excluded after Boris Johnson angered France by urging them to take back migrants who crossed the Channel. 25,000 people made the journey to the UK this year. 27 died trying to do so last week. The EU's border agency is now set to dispatch a plane to monitor the shores of the Channel for migrant activity. Stars of Formula One have been reacting to the death of motor racing legend Sir Frank Williams. The founder of the Williams Formula One team, who was 79, was admitted to hospital on Friday and passed away this morning. Reigning Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton said his legacy will live on forever. Well, you're right up to date. Now it's back to Patrick.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Patrick Christys, and we have a fantastic 3-hour show for you this evening. Fierce debate, big interviews, and hopefully loads of entertainment. In The Clash, we debate whether the mainstream media is too pro-lockdown. This is following yesterday's latest COVID briefing. At 10 p.m, I'll be speaking to lawyer, writer, broadcaster and legal commentator sensation Chris Daw in Patrick Meets. Our FAQs, do we take the NHS for granted? We'll talk to the author of the book, How to Avoid Being a Victim of the American Healthcare System, A Patient's Handbook for Survival, Dr. David Wilcox. And at 11 p.m, we have Uncensored with Frank Farage as we discuss if the term ladies is offensive. This is after students complained about a photographer who used the term. And with me throughout the show is my brilliant panel who'll be discussing tomorrow's headlines tonight and also today's big stories. They are Jason Reed, UK lead of Young Voices, women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane and political commentator Andre Walker. But I also want you to get in touch with me. Of course I do. Contact me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or by email, of course, or on Twitter even, and Facebook at GBNews. Ladies and gentlemen, let's do the thing. If we live in a world where facts are not facts and non-facts are facts, then frankly, we've lost the plot. And that's a fact. But I fear that that's where we are now, don't you? Just look at the latest COVID variant, Omicron. It sounds like a Bond villain, doesn't it? We're being told that this is possibly more of a threat than the Delta version. Yet the South African doctor who discovered it says it's mild and you won't even lose your sense of taste or smell. We were told it was the Botswana variant that had originated in the bodies of people with HIV. Botswana came out and said that it actually came from people travelling to the country, none of whom had HIV. Vast swathes of our media are hammering the government, demanding that they take tougher action, that we lock down. Why? Well, it's all in the name of public health and safety. Well, lockdowns mean fewer GP and hospital appointments. They mean crippling mental health problems for many. They mean total isolation for the elderly. They mean the stunting of economic growth and potential job losses. And when people become poorer, their health can often get worse. We're now entering into a third wave of excess deaths in this country that can't be explained by COVID, meaning people are dying because of the strains on the NHS, not the new strain of the COVID virus, lower bed availability in hospitals, and quite possibly simply out of fear of going to the hospital or to their GP. Because of the health system's almost singular focus on COVID, which is being done to save lives, is it? But it's not just our health sector that seems to be suspending fact. Look at what's happening in the Channel. The latest line from the woke brigade is that those making the crossings are, quote, people, not migrants. Well, they can be both, can't they? It's not a binary choice. Cristiano Ronaldo is a person. He's also a footballer. Gordon Ramsay is a person. He's also a chef. We're also told that all of these people are asylum seekers. But that is a suspension of fact as well, isn't it? What happened in the Channel with the deaths of those migrants was undoubtedly an absolute tragedy. I shed a tear when I saw the news breaking, and I've gone on record demanding that this is a turning point and that this madness must be stopped before more lives are lost. One thing to happen after the incident was that, unlike most Channel crossings, which are shrouded in total secrecy, we were able to find out some information about some of those on board. Take Mohammed Shaker as an example, the 21-year-old shepherd from Iran's Kurdish region who actually survived the ordeal. Well, he said he wanted to come to the UK to find work so that he could help pay for his sister's medical bills. That's a very noble reason to do anything, but he's not an asylum seeker, is he? We have to be able to say that, because to claim that he is, again, is the suspension of fact. And then let's take another example. What's going on with the trans lobby at the moment? There was a headline this week that read like this: Teesside woman accused of exposing penis in public. Nope, Teesside man accused of exposing penis in public. Then there's the whole men can have a cervix row that erupted around the time of the Labour Party conference. No, they can't. I never thought I'd ask this on national TV, but where's my cervix? You only have to take one look at me to know that I may not necessarily be the world's biggest expert when it comes to certain parts of the female anatomy, but I am almost certain that the cervix is, very much, a woman thing. We're seeing now, according to crime stats, that more women are committing rape. Well, they're not. Men identifying as women are. Again, that's the suspension of fact. Stonewall, the LGBT rights group, say lesbians who don't want to sleep with trans women are potentially committing sexual racism. No, again, that's the suspension of logic. Lesbians don't have to be attracted to a trans woman simply because they're now a trans woman. Actually, the real fact of the matter is that anyone is allowed to be attracted to anyone else and to not be attracted to anyone else. I fear that we're now well and truly in the post-truth era, and that's a massive concern. Facts matter. How people feel about those facts don't. We're not all living in a children's fantasy. We're living in reality, and there has to be a structure, a law, an order, and an objectivity about that reality. Facts have to mean something, and we discredit or ignore those at our peril. But you know what? Maybe I'm just banging my head against a brick wall, and I should just get on with it and jump on the bandwagon. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, with that in mind, I'm Fiona Bruce, this is Antiques Roadshow, and tonight's episode is brought to you live from Mars. Yes, well, with me now and joining me throughout the show is my fantastic panel. Look at them, there they are. Jason Reed, UK lead at Young Voices, women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane, and political commentator, the one, the only, Andre Walker. So, look, we're going to get stuck in to my monologue first. And Jason, I'll start with you, my good man. What are your views on that? My opinion is that we are well and truly in a post-truth era.
I don't think that's a fair assessment of where we are, to be honest. My concern with part of what you said, when you said that the suggestion that the person has a penis means that they must be a man, that seems like a huge step backwards to me. I thought we'd come further than that in accepting trans people's identities and accepting that it's perfectly possible to have a different gender identity.
Biologically?
Of course, well, biologically, people can have operations, but just because somebody has a penis, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a man. Just because someone has a cervix, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a woman. If you're trans, you're statistically much more likely to be diagnosed with depression, to attempt suicide, and indeed to commit suicide. And I think a lot of that is a direct result of the kind of rhetoric that you produced just there. It's the stigmatisation, it's the alienation of an entire group of people, and it needs to stop.
Look, I disagree that there's any attempt there, because there isn't, from me to demonise or anything like that towards a particular group of people. I would never do such a thing. But what I am saying is I'm concerned that there's a suspension of logic when it comes to those kind of things. But I do take your point. Kelly, I'm going to throw over to you. Of course, you are a women's rights campaigner. What's your take on this, then?
I think you're totally right when it comes to, no, women don't have penises at all, ever, not from birth, not to death. Men have penises. The only people that can transition supposedly from male to female would be men. I certainly don't think they can possibly do that in a month of Sundays. So I totally agree with you. We are in a post-truth world and it's really frightening. It's just mass gaslighting repeatedly.
OK, Andre, what's your take on this, especially when it comes to things like what's been happening now? I mentioned a few things there, you know, about what we're being told about the latest variant, for example, and loads of others. Also about what we're being told about the nature of what's going on in the channel. What's your take on what I've just said?
Well, first of all, I have something in common with a lot of these people in the terms of the fact that I'm disappointed by my penis as well, but perhaps for different reasons. Mind you, I look in the mirror and think I've got bulimia because I think I look fat. But anyway, no. On a serious note, I think it is an incredibly dangerous situation. And one of the things that worries me more than anything else, I don't mind if you wish to transition from one gender to the other, but the idea that you just simply go on, walk up to people one day and say, my name's Karen, I'm a woman, I think is unacceptable. But I do think there is a point about the mental health issue, and this is a huge thing. If you wish to become a woman or you wish to become a man, get on with it and do it. But, you know, gender dysmorphia is a mental health problem. Amputating your genitals will not relieve you of that problem. And quite often you see people transitioning, wanting to transition back. But on the wider point about post-facts, look, I'm going to go bigger than that. I think that when the Soviet Union fell in 1989, 1990, socialist economics and socialist systems of government were thoroughly discredited. The only way the political left can come back now is by setting people against each other and being dishonest. And I think we need to combat it.
All right, Jason, I'm going to come back to you. I would like to start by saying as well, all right, OK, both the panellists there did disagree with what you said about the trans issue. I did as well. But it's important that you can come on television and certainly come on any show that I'm doing and feel comfortable to make that point. And I always stand for that kind of thing. And I hope that you don't feel as though, you know, just because I'm against you that I think you're... Well, I do think you're wrong, but it's not really the point. You know what I mean. Anyway, but let's just focus on another element of what I said there, if that's OK, Jason, which is what's going on in the channel at the moment. Now, this people not migrants thing, I've made my point pretty clear there. I think you can be both. I'm concerned now at the lines that are being pumped out by, especially the likes of Amnesty, which is they're all asylum seekers. Well, one thing to emerge from the incredibly tragic situation that happened, of course, earlier this week was that it emerged that some of those people were not asylum seekers. How do you feel about what's happening in the channel at the moment and some of the rhetoric around it?
I think pointing out that they're people not migrants is important. Of course, we know that people can be more than one thing. But the way we talk about channel crossings sometimes suggests a degree of dehumanisation when we talk about wave machines and we're talking about ways to turn the boats back, that they're just an inconvenience, that we just need to push them back over there so that they're not our concern. I think there is certainly a lot of responsibility that needs to fall on the French government's shoulders, that they're not doing enough to stop these dangerous crossings, they're not doing enough to intercept these horrible, exploitative people trafficking gangs. But at the same time, Britain is a global superpower. We have to do our part as well. We should be taking in more people than we are taking in, and we should in general have a more compassionate attitude to people. I can't imagine being so desperate that I'm willing to climb into one of those unsafe dinghies, possibly with children in tow, to make that perilous channel crossing. And I think if people are willing, people are at that point, we should show a bit more compassion.
But Patrick, can I make this point to you? Look, the solution to the ills of the world is not to empty the entirety of the world into the United Kingdom. Look, I feel very sorry for people in Libya and people in Syria, but the idea that you're going to take all the young men from these countries and move them to the United Kingdom, look at the damage that was done to Poland and other Eastern European countries when we simply opened our borders and let their most talented people come to the United Kingdom. It was a significant problem. So this whole thing on economic migration we have to deal with. And let me tell you this, these people, I think, on the political left are doing this deliberately. They want us to have an uncontrolled immigration system, but their method of doing it is to subvert the law. And that's why you end up with people crossing the channel, which everyone forgets is the busiest waterway in the world, and anybody that's been on a cross-channel ferry in bad weather will tell you it's also one of the most dangerous.
OK. Kelly, is there not a slight dichotomy here between the notion that we are such a inherently racist country and that we have a lot of apologising to do and that our society is divided massively and we've all got some kind of unconscious or indeed conscious bias, and then the notion that for many people, especially in parts of the Middle East and Africa, are so desperate to come here because we're the place to be? Can both of those two things be true at the same time?
Probably not, but I think coming to this country, we've got a great reputation. We're a nice place to be. I don't think people in the Middle East think we're racist. I don't know if they really care, if they're very desperate to leave their own countries. I don't think they care anything about whether we take the knee or whether we talk about BLM, quite frankly. But it's really odd with the two ideas that we want to stop human trafficking, but at the same time, and of course we should want to stop human trafficking, but at the same time, we're saying let all the boats come and let's not deal with the traffickers, let's just pick people up. But we're not doing anything about the traffickers. We don't seem to be able to solve that at all. It's just quite a dangerous and pretty awful situation.
Yeah, I do suppose, though, Jason, there is another side to it, which is, yes, I think we can all agree we want to smash the human trafficking rings. I think another way of doing it as well is finding a way of stopping these boats ultimately being delivered to Calais. No boats, no crossings at the end of the day. But maybe, Jason, we do need to have a look at changing our asylum system, because at the moment, pretty much as I understand it, you have to basically get here to claim asylum. And some might say that's encouraging people making this trip.
Well, we do need to do something radical to stop this situation. I don't even think stopping boats getting to Calais would solve the problem, because then you just have people climbing into the back of lorries, and we've seen in the past how tragic that can be as well. This is, as I said before, I think it's the French government that needs to pull its finger out and do a lot more. There was one case a few weeks ago, they broke the record for the number of crossings in one day, with over 1,000 crossings, and their excuse for not stopping any of the boats was that it was a bank holiday, and also that Kamala Harris was visiting, and so some of their resources were off dealing with that. That's just completely unacceptable.
Blaming Kamala Harris for illegal immigration? Surely not. Carry on.
The situation as it stands now with all these crossings in the Channel, nobody supports that. Whether you're the most pro or the most anti-immigration person in the world, nobody thinks that what's happening now is a good thing. And so the only explanation for what's happening now is widespread government incompetence, just inability to deal with this one way or another, whether it's processing the asylum seekers and the others in France, whether it's doing something else to stop the people trafficking gangs. Something has to be done, because we can't carry on like this.
Hang on a second. Actually, when you talk about people getting on lorries, we did resolve the lorry system, and nobody in Britain likes to talk about it, because the way it was done was we built a wall at the French border and Britain paid. You may have heard a similar policy from other people in the United States of America. And actually, by defending the lorries in Calais, we stopped that happening. The fact is, look, somebody is buying, I don't know, 100 dinghies a week from somebody and shipping them to Calais, because they never get the dinghies back. So surely there is a way of tracking this down. Actually, we just can't be bothered doing it. And the other thing that is utterly ludicrous is when these people get to Dover, we say officially we don't know what country they've come from, so we don't know which country to deport them back to. We do know which country they've come from. They've come from France. We're just denying that because we know that if they've now burnt their papers or thrown them into the English Channel, they will never, ever be deported. And bluntly, there's a conspiracy to support them in some of the echelons of the British government because these people just love asylum seekers.
OK, Kelly, just to finish, because I think in my monologue there I spoke a bit about some of the trans issues, obviously some of the migrant stuff. Another element was, of course, what we're hearing in relation to the new coronavirus rules and regs and concerns, frankly. What's your overall take on Omicron, which, again, I'll re-emphasise, sounds like a Bond villain, doesn't it? But how do you feel about this new variant?
Well, one of my friends rightly pointed out it's an anagram of moronic. I think that if we have to go into another lockdown, I think a lot of people just won't do it. I think people have had enough. I think small businesses, many have closed and never reopened. I think a significant amount of small towns across the country were on their knees already, and now they're pretty broken. I don't want to see kids in masks. I just think the whole socialisation and losing the ability to communicate, certainly for people with hearing impairments, it's been really isolating for them. So as far as I'm concerned, we need to try everything, maybe something that actually works, before we send people into sort of economic suicide.
All three of you, cracking start. Hopefully more of this to come. And indeed, coming up later this hour, why have the BBC dropped the term Megxit for their upcoming documentary? We'll tell you all about that. And in The Clash, we debate whether the mainstream media is too pro-lockdown. You can cast your vote on our Twitter poll right now, by the way. We'll have the results for you after the debate.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, mask wearing will be mandatory in shops and on public transport in England from Tuesday. That's according to Health Secretary Sajid Javid. It follows yesterday's briefing from Prime Minister Boris Johnson as he set out new travel and face-covering measures to help combat the new Omicron variant. But it was questioning from the mainstream media, a bit too pro-lockdown. Let's take a listen, shall we?
How likely is it that those restrictions could be ratcheted up in 3 weeks' time rather than wound down? And can you say with any confidence at the moment that people can keep their Christmas plans? Have people amongst your sage advisors been pushing for full Plan B now? And if not, why not?
Have you modelled the potential spread of this new variant over the next few weeks and months? What picture does that show? And can we really rule out lockdowns.
I mean, so there'll be people watching this wondering why you're not going further into Plan B and ordering people to work from home, if that might help us actually have something towards a normal Christmas and reduce the spread. Also, things like having vaccine passports and using the check-in apps once again. So why aren't you doing that?
Yes, a collection of people there who would be exempt from any lockdown as key workers and possibly don't have any friends to spend Christmas with anyway. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that Ofcom's note to broadcasters on how to report the crisis responsibly is thus. It reads like this, ladies and gents. In particular, we strongly advise you take particular care when broadcasting, for example, statements that seek to question or undermine the advice of public health bodies on the coronavirus, or otherwise undermine people's trust in the advice of mainstream sources of information about the disease. Calvin Robinson, darling of GBNews and Conservative commentator, of course, and indeed a regular, like I've said, on this channel, he pointed out, in his opinion, that Ofcom is overtly stifling the free press. Well, look, let's have a discussion about all of this, shall we? Here to debate this is Paul Connew, media commentator and author, and Richard Tice as well, leader of Reform UK. So, look, thank you very much, both of you, for joining. Now, look, I'd just like to start with you, Paul, on this. Our overall question is, is the mainstream media too pro-lockdown? What do you think?
No, I don't. I think it's fairly balanced. Yes, it's true that some papers of the left are probably more inclined to be pro-lockdown and those on the right less so. But the clips you just showed was simply journalists asking the questions that the public would be asking given the opportunity. So I don't think that displayed any degree of pro-lockdown bias. It was legitimate and logical questioning.
OK, well, we'll get stuck into that, but I've got to go to Richard first, or indeed Richard first, depending on which way the camera is. Richard, what's your view on this? Do you think that our mainstream media is too pro-lockdown?
Patrick, good evening. What was interesting about those clips is that they were from the broadcasters, BBC, Sky and ITV. The subsequent questions from some of the newspapers were actually, I think, a bit more balanced, asking some questions. But the truth is that, the Prime Minister's, the first measures they're imposing are masks and the wearing of masks in shops and back on public transport. But where's the questioning about the effectiveness of masks? The evidence of masks, both scientific, clinical trials, is derisory, that they have any effect at all. And the anecdotal evidence, let's take Germany, for example, Patrick, where not only did they have to wear masks, everybody had to wear the N95 surgical mask of much higher specification and quality. And yet Germany is now seeing more than double the number of cases on a 7-day basis than it's ever previously seen. So clearly, masks make literally almost no difference whatsoever. The one study that I've seen is what's called the Denmark study that shows there was no statistical significance. So why aren't the media, Patrick, asking about the effectiveness of masks and indeed the collateral damage of lockdowns? That's what a media should be doing, is questioning the government, having learnt the lessons or not over the last 18 months about the benefit of the various measures.
All right, Richard. Well, look, Paul, I suppose one argument there is the math side, as Richard pointed out. Another one, I was quite surprised at the fact that there wasn't a bit more questioning as to what the noises coming out of South Africa were, which were that the actual Omicron strain, as far as they can see, appears to be relatively mild and actually you don't even necessarily lose your sense of taste and smell. Also, Botswana, we were told initially it was a Botswanan variant. They vehemently denied that. And the science hasn't always been that accurate in the past. Could you see, Paul, maybe why some people think that elements of the media aren't too big on questioning the science and the fact?
Well, maybe so, but I disagree with Richard there. There are studies that do suggest that masks, although not foolproof, certainly, are of benefit. But I think what was interesting at that press conference was that Boris Johnson didn't really want to bring himself to utter the word mask. He's got his own problems about the mask issue. And, and he mumbled something, in fact, which didn't really make it clear until a member of the media asked him, well, are you introducing mandatory masks? And he then said yes. rather grudgingly, and then made it pretty clear that he wanted Sajid Javid to be the man making that announcement. He'd rather not have been asked that question. But at the same time, we have a situation where we don't really know Omicron's, strength and danger to us. I mean, in southern Africa, the population is very young, and therefore it's not that surprising that the effects are fairly mild. What we don't know are the effects, in Europe when we're talking about people in 50, 60, 70 and 80-year-old age brackets. It's a very different. So I think the government have to be aware, and even Boris Johnson has to be aware, that we've had 2 examples of delays with being exceeding in public health terms. We still have the highest death rates in Europe, and therefore I think this was a case of the government deciding this time they weren't going to be caught delaying. Now, whether this action is proportionate or not, I think it is proportionate. Whether it needs to go further is the open question. But I've been arguing that England should have adopted mandatory mask wearing for some time, just as it applies in certain conditions, as applies in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And I think it's only
how are their
Boris
cases
Johnson's
being
libertarian instinct.
Okay, yeah, I do get what you're saying, but I think there is the case to be made, isn't it, that cases in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have not been so dramatically lower. In fact, in many cases, the opposite, actually, as a result of their mandatory mask wearing. So
it's moved in different directions at different times.
But... Of course it does. But absolutely. Look, Paul, we'll come back to you. I just want to get Richard back in here. Paul mentioned something earlier that I thought was really interesting, actually, about, in his view, they may be asking the questions, a lot of the media at these things, asking the questions that the public wanted asked. Now, there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, and I'm saying this as someone who's in the media, as to whether or not someone like me shapes public opinion by the things that I say or can help to, or whether or not I hold a mirror up to public opinion. Where do you stand on that? Because some people would argue that the government's approach to this by doing these press conferences can be a bit scary for people, and actually that the media focusing on things like lockdowns and further measures actually fuels some public fear. What would you argue to that?
I think that you're absolutely right, Patrick, without question. If the media, in a sense, follow the government's measures and then ask, well, why haven't you gone further on this and that and the other, then that does fuel a sense of fear. The role of the media is to question the government. And it's perfectly reasonable to question it one way as long as there's balance. Questioning it the other way and saying, well, hang on, Prime Minister, why are you introducing mask mandates when, take Sweden, for example, where cases are on the floor, where mercifully they have very little death rate, they've never had a mask mandate. What more evidence do we want than probably one of the most successful countries in terms of dealing with this pandemic than a country that doesn't have a mask mandate against a country that doesn't? That's what I would expect. Okay. Balanced media questioning, rightful questioning of the government to have. Ask it both ways, a bit more or a bit less, to make sure.
What is being asked, Richard? Richard, there have been lots of arguments on this.
Okay, all right, Richard, go on, Paul, what you say?
Richard's speaking nonsense there. There have been lots of focus on Sweden, whose figures aren't as clear, and the Swedish social profile is different. But there's been lots of media coverage of the Swedish situation. I'm amazed that anybody says that the media is actually taking one side. There are both sides of the argument being followed and being reported on and investigated. And on this, nothing is absolutely clear. But the idea that the media, the mainstream media, is all on one side and pro-lockdown is in fact nonsense.
Can you name me a single time when anyone who's been a member of the quotes-unquote mainstream media has called for no lockdown, has not pushed that line there, Paul?
Yes, the Daily Mail on occasions, and the Daily Express and the Daily Telegraph. There's 3 examples to start with.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, Richard, come back to that, because then, what Paul said there, I think really what a lot of people were thinking when we said mainstream media was potentially more of the broadcasting wing of it. But, hey, the print side of it is mainstream as well, Richard.
There are elements of the print side that have questioned the collateral damage of lockdowns. But I certainly can't recall any broadcast media questioning the effectiveness of masks. And the simple evidence from nations that don't have mask mandates is crystal clear and cannot be denied. And there's very little by way of print media that actually questions the effectiveness of masks. And actually what they are an instrument of fear, particularly, and I'm horrified that the first thing that seems to be happening is, as of tomorrow, numerous schools across the country are imposing mask mandates on children who are the group of people who suffer mercifully the very least from this virus. And yet, once again...
But they can still transmit, though, Richard. That's the issue. They have parents, they have grandparents.
And Paul, there's no evidence that masks stops transmission. No evidence whatsoever. And therefore...
Yes, there is evidence to that effect. There's some scientists arguing one way and some the other way.
All right. Okay. All right. Paul, is there any, from your perspective now, do you not think that potentially we're at risk here of being a little bit blinkered when it comes to... Look, as yet, we don't know entirely what Omicron really means. We don't have the long-term data on it. It may well turn out, obviously, that this thing is in some way more transmissible, is in some way more deadly, and I can completely understand why a government might want to end up operating slightly on the side of caution until we know that for sure. So there's no dispute about that whatsoever. However, lockdowns and increased measures do have knock-on effects in other areas of our lives, don't they? They can mean that fewer GP appointments, they can mean fewer hospital appointments, they can mean mental health crises, for example, from people being locked indoors. Are we at risk of being a bit too blinkered here and pushing potentially for greater restrictions that could do things, on top of all those things, like stifle our economy as well?
But if the worst-case scenario comes true, when we have to go into a full Plan B scenario, that's going to be very damaging anyway. So although I'm usually very critical of Boris Johnson, I think on this occasion, precautionary measures taken early make sense. Hopefully, Omicron won't turn out to be, as dangerous as some scientists fear, but we've got to be absolutely certain. And I think sensible precautions taken early make sense. Hopefully it works. But if it doesn't work, we've got serious problems. And then, of course, the challenge is, will we see... I think the majority of the British people will cooperate, whatever the restrictions are. But we might get small-scale versions of what's happening in Austria, for example.
Well, you've led me. It's seamlessly done, Paul. Seamlessly done, because you've led me on to my final question for Richard to give him the final word on this. We start with you, Paul. We'll finish with Richard. Do you think, Richard, that the vast majority of the British public would comply if there were extreme measures such as another lockdown?
It's a great question, Patrick, and I think there'll be a much greater percentage who didn't comply than last time, but I suspect that would still be less than 50%. And I think it depends on the severity, but there's many more people who feel, they've done what they're asked to, they've been part of the team, they've been double vaccinated or they've had the booster, and therefore they've done their bit, and that's enough. And I think there's a greater sense that we've got to learn to live with this amongst a larger percentage of the population. But is that more than 50%? Probably not.
Look, both of you, thank you very much. This was called The Clash. It was indeed a clash, and I thought it was fantastic on both fronts. We covered a range of stuff there. Hopefully everyone at home feels the same way as well. Thank you very much, Paul Conyer, media commentator and author, and Richard Tice as well, leader of Reform UK. How good was that? Make sure you get in touch as well with your views on this. gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can get in touch on Twitter as well, @GBNews, and indeed loads of you will be doing. Whose side were you on there? Do you believe the polls when it says that most people potentially would want greater restrictions? Do you think that the vast majority of the media is pro-lockdown? Here we go so far. I'm squinting now because I'm very far away from my monitor. But I understand that it's where are we? 93% say yes. The mainstream media are getting shouted at badly here. 93% of the mainstream media say that it's too pro-lockdown. Only 7% say that it's not. Well, there we go. Thank you very much, everyone who's taking part in that. Keep it coming. Now, after the break, is the term Megxit misogynistic? Let's find out. And also coming up, there's still time for you to make your voice heard in Patrick Meets with Chris Daw. That's at 10 p.m. Send us your questions via email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. Get going, people.
You're watching watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, good evening, everybody, and welcome back. Now, the second part of a controversial BBC documentary on the royals will be named Sussexit over fears that the word Megxit is indeed sexist. Well, Megxit was included in the Collins English Dictionary as one of the top 10 new words of 2020. Prince Harry recently said the word, used by the press to describe the decision by him and his wife, Meghan, to quit their royal duties, was, quote, misogynistic. Well, that was, and also that it was created by a troll, apparently. That's interesting. Anyway, as a result, BBC bosses have chosen not to use the title on Monday night's episode of The Princes and the Press. Joining me now to discuss this is Charles Ray, former royal correspondent at The Sun. There he is, a wonderful smiling face to greet the nation this particular Sunday evening. Basically, all of this hinges on whether or not the term Megxit is sexist. And I think really what that hinges on, Charles, doesn't it, is whether or not it was more Meghan wanting to leave the royal family than Harry. Because if it was a Megxit, then it is one, isn't it?
Well, it is a Megxit, and I have to say, Patrick, this underlines that there isn't anybody at the BBC who's got a clue about headlines, newspaper headlines, or even broadcast headlines, and certainly the idiot who lives in Montecito hasn't got a clue either. It was the Sun who actually is credited with the first headline on Megxit on January the 9th in 2020. We were the ones, or the Sun came up with it, and everybody else followed it.
But maybe you're a troll, Charles. Maybe that's what it is.
Sorry?
Maybe you're the troll, according to Prince Harry.
I've been accused of all sorts of things, Patrick. I don't really care. To be perfectly honest, this was a play on the phrase Brexit, if you remember, at that time. That's why the Sun came up with it. That's why the Sun comes up with these great headlines. It's not misogynistic. It's got nothing at all to do with misogynism or racism or any other ism you would care to mention. And I'm afraid the Duke of Sussexit hasn't got a clue what he's talking about. But it just goes to show that this programme tomorrow night is in actual fact weighted toward, well, it seems to be, because I don't know what's in it, but certainly from the first one, is weighted towards, showing Meghan and Harry in a good light. I mean, the last time it was on last Monday, we had the Duchess's lawyer on there sort of saying that she wasn't a bully and she was a joy to work with. There's no mention on that last programme that there's an actual investigation by the palace into allegations, which she denies, that Meghan was guilty of forcing out 2 personal aides and being a bit naughty and nasty to several other people.
And also, as well, there was some interesting elements that Meghan Markle misremembered or indeed didn't remember at all when it came to the court hearing that's been taking place recently, isn't there? And it's amazing, isn't it, what a selective memory they can have. What's your view on that?
And that was exposed quite nicely, actually, in the programme when you had the Meghan cheerleader-in-chief, Omid Scobie, claiming, without any evidence whatsoever, that people at the palace were briefing against Meghan. Unfortunately for him, this was filmed, several months ago, and this is before Meghan made her amazing confession that she'd actually contributed to this book via a personal aid. She'd supplied text messages and a script as to what should be given to this guy. So he was caught out as well. And I'm just wondering whether he'll be doing more rubbish tomorrow night.
Is this whole BBC giving in to Harry and Meghan's, or specifically Harry, actually, his idea, his notion that the term Megxit is misogynistic? Is the BBC doing that, do you think, because they've aligned themselves with Harry and Meghan overtly against the palace? Do they see this now, and are they trying to frame this as a battle of left versus right?
I'm not so sure I understand why the BBC is actually doing this programme, given that the BBC is in deep doo-doo, Patrick, over certain things that have happened in recent years with the royal family, not least of all...
You could argue they should have been in deeper doo-doo with things that happened years ago as well, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But up to date, the Panorama programme, in which they had to pay out £750,000 to a designer who was tricked into faking documents to entice Princess Diana to make this programme with Martin Bashir, plus a healthy, I think it's a healthy sum of money to the Prince's Foundation as well. So, it's a war now between the royal family and the BBC. And I think at the end of the day, the royals are entitled to decide who they want to allow to cover certain events. We've already seen this carol concert that the Duchess of Cambridge is due to host in a few weeks has been taken away from the BBC and it's been given to ITN, who've been welcoming it with open arms.
No, they have, exactly. It is a staggering situation here, isn't it? It's a question marks really now. Maybe, just maybe, let me play devil's advocate here, that we as a nation, we didn't understand Meghan Markle. We didn't understand where she came from. What we did understand was the royal family and the nature of it. And bless her little cotton socks. She got caught up in the whole thing. She thought that it would all just be tiaras and tea parties. And actually, sometimes she had to cut the ribbon outside a new town hall somewhere in Scunthorpe. And goodness me, there's no way she could have known that. And she was well within her rights to disappear back off to California and raise chickens.
Well, that's some devil's advocate you're playing there, Patrick. I can tell you that much. Well, let's look at the facts. When Meghan came over here and was going out with Prince Harry and then eventually married him, she was welcomed with open arms. It suddenly changed when Meghan suddenly realised that she wasn't going to be the star of the show. She didn't realise that in the royal family there is a pecking order. There's the Queen, there's Prince Charles, and then there is the Duke of Cambridge, and Harry is under that, alongside their respective wives. And one of the things is you don't step on anyone else's toes when they're doing something. But Meghan couldn't stand that. She wanted to be number one all the time. It's a great, great pity, because they could have been such a valuable asset, not just to the royal family, but to the UK as well. And just a very, very sad state of affairs now.
It's true, but there is also something that does stand out for me, which is a number of Prince Harry's exes. What stands out for me is not the amount of exes he's had. I can completely understand why he's an attractive prospect, certainly when you are of a certain age. However, not a lot of them seem to want to come out and go, gosh, I wish I was Meghan. Gosh, I wish I had that life. Is there an argument to be made there that if you're a member of a certain society, if you've got money, if you've got a lot going for you, actually, you will probably already be very rich, you'll probably marry someone else rich, and you don't need the burden on your life that the royal family brings you? And if that is the case, ultimately, is this Harry's fault? Should he have warned Meghan more?
I think with some of his ex-girlfriends, they sort of sat back and they had a light bulb moment, really, and sort of thought, hang on a second, I don't really want to get involved in the royal family with all its exposure, with all its constant, everybody either criticising you or praising you or whatever else. I think Meghan was at fault here, and I'll tell you for why. Because when you look at the way that Meghan was welcomed into the royal family by everybody, it's a completely different situation to when Princess Diana and the Duchess of York came into the royal family. They were very much left to their own devices and to fend for themselves. The men in the grey suits were scheming against them. But both William and Harry never let that affect, Catherine and Meghan. They were fighting there for them. And honestly, the royal family welcomed that girl into their family with open arms. You just got to look at the wedding when Prince Charles partially walked her down the aisle. It's just they were bent over backwards for her.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Charles Ray, their former royal correspondent at The Sun. Now, I'm going to bring in my fantastic panel who've been reunited. Now, who do I go to first? I'll go to Jason first. Jason Reid, of course, UK lead at Young Voices. Let's just ground it again in what we started this discussion as. Is the phrase Megxit, is the word Megxit sexist?
Look, misogyny is a real and very important issue. There are countless examples of it in the world. This is not one of them. This is just a continuation of one of the most privileged people, living one of the most privileged lives imaginable, continually using her enormous platform to moan about how she's the victim of some grand conspiracy and how everyone's out to get her and how she's going to have to use her new Netflix deal and her new Spotify deal to tell us all again how difficult her life is. Megxit is not an abusive term, it's not insulting, it is, as Charles Ray was saying, it's just a play on Brexit. It's descriptive, if nothing else. I'd say it's neutral. It certainly isn't misogynistic, and this is just another PR-driven, attention-seeking ploy from Meghan and Harry because they want us to keep talking about them so that they don't become irrelevant.
Gosh, can you imagine a world where they're just totally irrelevant? Anyway, women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane. Kelly, you're very much all woman. Do you think that this is misogynistic, this phrase?
No, I don't. I also think Sussexit is a terrible word.
It's a terrible word.
It's so bad. I think that obviously Harry and Meghan had enough of the limelight, and so they've quietly gone away to California where they can be unknowns and live a really peaceful, quiet existence. And I think we should all respect that.
Yeah, so well, indeed, we should, and we should stop talking about them, and we should definitely never watch any Netflix documentary that ever comes their way. Andre, I'm going to throw this one over to you now. Political commentator Andre Walker. Is Megxit sexist? Is there an element of sexism when it comes to Meghan? Is there an element of racism when it comes to Meghan?
No, and I think Charles Ray was entirely right. The big issue that I think has come about here is that in the United States of America, there are racial tensions that are quite different to the United Kingdom. And what happened, I think, was Meghan came along. I mean, remember, she offered to live in Windsor Castle. So basically, she thought what was going to happen was they're going to boot out the Queen and she's going to move in instead. And when she discovered that wasn't going to happen, it was all racism. Look, in the United States of America, it might have been that there was a racial issue against her. In the United Kingdom, there absolutely wasn't. What there was an issue of her being the worst example of Hollywood. There's narcissistic, self-obsessed, pathetic, unknowledgeable on political issues. This is my truth culture. No, there's truth and there's stuff that's not truth. There's not your truth. I find the whole thing absolutely extraordinary. But in terms of the BBC, look, the last death throes of a failed institution. But to be fair to them, they're going out with a bang. I remember when TV shows like Newsnight used to have actual viewers. Now all they have is extremely well-paid left-wing correspondents gobbing off to people in Hampstead. But, they're going down in flames, they're going down fighting, and at least they're standing by the principles. 20 years and these guys are finished.
OK, all right, Jason, just look, you all obviously seem to agree pretty much with yourselves on this particular issue. Can you at least maybe see, Jason, you don't strike me as an uber-royalist. Can you see maybe potentially how the royal family did make Meghan and Harry's lives pretty tricky?
For the record, I'm also happy to offer to live in Windsor Castle. If that's something that's going. There was certainly some unkind coverage, perhaps, if we're going to be really kind to Meghan. But, I mean, that's sort of what you sign up for. It's hard to have much sympathy when you're marrying into the royal family. It's hard to think of a bigger step up.
But do you think the royals maybe made them so? Do you think the royals could have done more? Wills, Kate, the Queen, do you think they maybe made their lives a bit difficult? Maybe they were briefing against them a bit.
Well, there was obviously a culture clash. Meghan has talked recently about how she feels that the other members of the royal family just didn't understand her relationship with her father, for example. They didn't understand why she wasn't able to just talk to him and to make him stop doing the unhelpful media briefings that he was doing. There was obviously a big difference in life experience, a very big culture clash going on when she tried to join that family. But the way she's responded to that is just the most undignified response she possibly could have come up with, and so I think it's very, very difficult to have sympathy with.
Do you know what she studied at university, Patrick? I've said this to you before on other programmes.
Go on, remind
She studied drama and international relations.
Yeah.
Now, if that doesn't tell you all you need,
well, she's made a career out of both of them now, hasn't she?
I mean, actually, I can't imagine what university would allow you to do those two together. What job would you get? At Dissident Royal being one of them, but there aren't many others.
It's true. Well, I'll tell you what, she's got tremendous foresight. Kelly, I'll just throw over to you now because we're going to have to move on from this very, very shortly. But when it comes to Meghan and Harry moving over there, can you understand why they did it? You just maybe thought that once they had done it, they should just shut up.
Well, no, I don't understand why they did it, really. I sort of think that she must have known. I think you would have to be really ignorant if you didn't have any idea of the royal family. And what they were like and the traditions and how you were expected to fit in. So do I understand them moving to like a multi-million-pound mansion in California as opposed to staying in the UK once she'd made some demands and they hadn't been met? I guess I do. But I do think the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, I would imagine there's podcasts, more Netflix series, maybe a movie. I'm sure it will just be relentless.
There are podcasts, we're gonna just nobody's listened to them.
We're going to have to leave it, I'm afraid. It's just interesting, very quickly. I went to Winter Wonderland last night and there was a roller coaster there that's on all day, every day and will be for a month. And it's a question as to whether or not that's been taken for a ride more than Prince Harry. But anyway, coming up, there's still time for you to make your voice heard in Patrick Meets, and that's at 10 p.m. Get your questions in for one of the country's leading barristers, Chris Daw. But first, it's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking to get off to a very cold and frosty start with icy stretches in places. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a dry, cold and locally icy start to the day across southwest England with bright or sunny spells in the east, but thicker cloud across Devon and Cornwall. It will also be very cold in southeast England, but there will also be plenty of sunshine and just a few coastal showers in the east. Any early brightness in the east of Wales will fade as cloudy skies develop more widely. It will stay cold, however, after an early frost for most. Northwest England will be very cold with icy stretches, especially where there is snow on the ground over the hills. Bright at first, but turning increasingly cloudy through the morning. Across into northeast England, and this will also be very cold to the start of the day here, with temperatures widely well below freezing and a risk of icy surfaces. Dry and bright though, with some sunshine. It will be a cold and frosty start in Scotland as well, but skies will generally be cloudier, especially in the west, where patchy light rain and hill snow is possible. Not quite as cold over in Northern Ireland, with generally cloudy skies and a few showery outbreaks of light rain, especially in the west of the province at times. Staying dry in most areas through the morning, with cloud increasing in the west, but staying bright or sunny further east. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Evening everyone, it's 10 p.m. and coming up in the next hour, we welcome one of the country's leading lawyers onto the show, Chris Daw, who's represented some of the most famous people in the UK in some of the most high-profile cases. Footballers, no less, top-level criminals, not necessarily in the same bracket, of course, it's important to say. And in FAQs, we ask if the NHS is being taken for granted, with healthcare professional Dr. David Wilcox, who's been very critical of the private system in the United States. I know that's very much a hot topic at the moment, with people in this country often now having to pay for their treatment. And my panel will return as well for the news agenda as we go through today's big stories and give you a sneak peek of some of tomorrow's front pages as well at around 10:40 p.m. But now it's time for the news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts. These are the latest headlines. A third person in the UK has tested positive for the new Omicron variant of COVID. The individual is thought to have visited Westminster before leaving the country. The government has brought in a series of new measures to try and curb the spread of Omicron. From Tuesday, masks will become mandatory in shops and on public transport. And senior school children in communal areas will also have to wear face coverings. Meanwhile, travellers to the UK will need to quarantine ahead of a negative PCR test. Those who've arrived from red list countries must be tested and self-isolate for 10 days. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says despite the new regulations, there are no plans to cancel Christmas.
Given the number of mutations in this new variant, there's reason to think that it may be, and I stress the word may, that this variant may turn out to make our vaccines less effective. It may.
G7 health ministers will meet tomorrow to discuss international efforts to contain the new variant. It comes as scientists shared the first image of Omicron. It isn't yet clear whether the new strain is a cause for concern, but the president of the European Commission says we should not take any chances.
We take this Omicron variant very serious, and we know that we are now in a race against time. Why that? Because we know not all about this variant, but it is a variant of concern. And the scientists and manufacturers need 2 to 3 weeks to have a full picture about the quality of the mutations of this Omicron variant.
France has called for Britain to allow a clear legal path for seeking asylum in the UK. It comes after European leaders met in Calais today to discuss the migrant crisis. Home Secretary Priti Patel was deliberately excluded after Boris Johnson enraged France by urging them to take back people who crossed the Channel. 25,000 people made the journey to the UK this year. 27 died trying to do so last week. An EU border agency plane will now monitor the shores of the Channel for migrant activity. Stars of Formula One have paid tribute to motor racing legend Sir Frank Williams, who has died at the age of 79. The founder of the Williams Formula One team was admitted to hospital on Friday and passed away this morning. Reigning Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton said his legacy will live on forever. 61 people have been snowed in at a pub in the Yorkshire Dales since Friday. Staff and guests at the Tan Hill Inn have been sleeping on makeshift beds since Storm Arwen hit the UK. So far, they've been treated to a film night, a quiz and a karaoke. Well, those are the headlines. Back now to Patrick.
Good evening, everybody. Now, it's just after 10 p.m, so it's time for Patrick Meets. And my guest tonight is one of the country's leading lawyers. He's represented England footballers, world champions in boxing, multi-million-pound corporations, and even billionaires. In 2019, he presented a 5-part series commissioned by the BBC called Crime, Are We Tough Enough? And last year, he became an author with the book Justice on Trial, Radical Solutions for a System at Breaking Point. I am very pleased to welcome to the show the one and only Chris Daw. Chris, how are you?
Good evening. I'm in good shape. Thank you very much. And thank you for inflating my ego even more than it already was.
That's all right. Just before we get cracking, is that a home bar I can see you sitting in front of?
Yeah, that's the gin collection, although I'm not the only gin drinker in this house. But yes, there's plenty of it.
Fantastic stuff. You love to see it. All right, well, where to start is the big question with this, really. And I think, just so people get to know you a bit, I have bigged you up a bit there, but you have represented some very high-profile people and been a part of some very high-profile cases. So it might be worthwhile just giving us a quick summary before we get stuck into the more granular detail of some of the most important things that you've done.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in a nutshell, I grew up in Milton Keynes, went to a very ordinary comprehensive school in Bletchley, and was very lucky, but combination of circumstances to find my way at Manchester University in the late 80s, early 90s, and doing a law degree, which was kind of a somewhat spaced out experience, as you can imagine, given my background, and Manchester in that period of time. And then I went on very quickly in the early 90s, 92, 93, I qualified as a barrister, and I've been doing it ever since. So for 28 years, I've been involved in, as you say, every kind of criminal case. I was thinking about this the other day, and I can't think of a crime where I've not appeared in court, either, largely defending cases involving that crime. I mean, literally everything from murder to serious fraud to drugs conspiracies and everything you can possibly imagine. I've done it, and it's been a fascinating 28 years of a legal career so far.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those people have been about as high profile as it can get, hasn't it? I mean, some footballers, for example.
Yes, I mean, in the public domain, I've actually acted for quite a number of footballers. I mean, John Terry is probably the most prominent. He was the Chelsea and England captain at the time that I acted for him, but many others, most of whom are not in the public domain, and and that's exactly how they want it to stay.
Yes, well, I can imagine, and woe betide me, otherwise you'd end up prosecuting me in court, for example. So I don't want that. We do have something in common, although it's fair to say you've kicked on in a way that I never did legally. I actually, when the lockdown first happened and I thought my life had gone to pot, I decided that maybe I should have a career change, and so I went and did the GDL at the University of Law at Manchester. So we have got something a little bit in common anyway. But how did you manage to climb that greasy pole, as it were? Because law is an incredibly competitive profession. There's a lot of people there who get a little leg up as well, as indeed there is everywhere, but, often in law as well. How did you manage to climb that greasy pole?
Well, do you know what? It's a very good question because, as I say, I didn't really have any kind of family background in terms of, professional people that could give me that leg up that you described, which sadly has been all too common in the law and many other walks of life over the years. So the short answer is that, I qualified, I was 23 years of age when I first qualified, and when I first went to court with my wig and my gown and all the other stuff. And I think the short answer is I just did a good job, and I hope I still do. I don't think there's any magic to it. If you are good enough and if you win cases, or if, at the very least, if you impress your clients, then there will be more clients. And I'm a self-employed barrister. I'm as good as my last case, but actually I'm only as good as my next case. So the only way you get ahead is to do a good job. People, mention your name to other people. Often maybe people who are in quite a lot of trouble, but that's the nature of the beast. And so you just have to, it's no different to your job or I suspect most other people's. If you do well at it and you're good at it, people will notice, and ultimately you'll succeed in terms of bigger and bigger things.
You're wrong there. Some would argue I'm simply stealing a living, but there we go. Can you tell me about some of the times when you've got a result or not got a result when you expected it to go the other way? You must have had some pretty surprising outcomes.
Yeah, loads, to be honest. And I think we're quite pessimistic by nature, particularly those of us who defend in criminal cases. And I don't know if it's self-preservation but we tend to kind of assume we're going to lose, and ultimately the odds are stacked against us. So I guess we do have that mindset anyway. But I remember one case which was a very, very big drugs conspiracy involving hundreds of millions of pounds worth of cocaine being imported in a really quite sophisticated fashion. And the body of evidence in that case looked difficult, if I can put it in that way, for us as the defence. And I remember on the day of the jury's verdict, after we'd been going for 5 or 6 weeks in court with the trial, I was with my client and we had a conversation. And, obviously I can't tell you his name, but the conversation was along the lines, well, if this goes wrong today, we're looking at 30 to 35-year sentence. Which is the sort of sentence that people at the very top end of the drug business tend to get when they're convicted after a trial. And as it happened, he was acquitted about 3 or 4 hours later, and ended up in the pub down the road. But it's that, I guess, for people on the outside, understanding that enormous difference between the two outcomes, the difference between a not guilty verdict and he's back with his family that night, and a guilty verdict, and he could potentially even die in prison.
Yeah.
And so, that we live with every day. So that's an example of a case where, really, on one view, it should have gone against us, but it actually went in our favour. But equally, it can happen the other way around.
How do you find it, if indeed you ever have found it, and certainly not linking this question to the case that you've mentioned before, when maybe there are times when you think, look, I could get this person off, but actually I know they're guilty. And I know that they're not necessarily the nicest person in the world. And I know that there's every chance they might go on to commit damage and harm to other people going forward. How do you square that? Because it's easy, isn't it, just to say, I'm just doing my job, but there's more to it, isn't there?
Yeah, I think I square it because you only have to look at the alternative in order to really understand why the kind of mindset of a barrister saying it to a client, or not even saying, but thinking, I know you did it, so I'm going to do everything I can to lose the case. I mean, the minute anybody, in a society begins to think about that, they realise that, that's not really a free society where if you're accused of a crime, if your own lawyer is entitled to write you off and decide you're guilty and try and get you convicted, then how does anybody ever have a fair trial? And so I kind of reconcile it relatively easily, which is I know the rules. I know what the law says. I know the limits of what I am and am not allowed to do as a defence barrister. And I stick within those limits and those rules. And ultimately, I don't decide what happens. If a jury finds someone not guilty, it's the jury's decision, not mine. And I absolutely sleep well at night knowing that I've just done my part to make the justice system work. It's a small part of a big system, but if I do my best to do my job honestly and properly every day, then I think that's the best that I can do. And I certainly don't want to go bent, as it were, and start trying to get my own clients convicted.
Well, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. On the flip side of that, then, you must have had some incredibly rewarding experiences. You must have had some, incredibly rewarding moments. And can you maybe just rattle off a couple of those for us?
Yeah, I mean, and probably, it's a long time ago now, but my mum and dad came to watch me twice in court doing trials when I was, within maybe 7 or 8 years of qualifying. On one of them, they came to watch, both of them. I think they took the week off work. Well, I know they did. And they came to watch this trial, and I was representing a fairly high-profile sports person, and it was really quite a... it's quite a pressurised case for someone who, at that time, was only 6 or 7 years qualified. And my mum and dad sat through the whole trial, and they even ended up talking to my client's family, who'd come along to support him, and they'd sort of almost become, whether it was right or wrong, but they sort of almost developed a bit of an affinity and a friendship between them. And thankfully, at the end of that trial, my client was found not guilty, because if he'd have gone to prison, you can just imagine how that would have been for not only for him and his family, but for my mum and dad who'd just come along to watch. So I think that was an experience that was really something else, because you can appreciate, coming from my background, my mum and dad are still with us, and they're great people, but they worked incredibly hard and supported me in so many ways, and for them to be able to come along and watch an interesting case, but also thankfully for me win it, it kind of it puts into perspective why we have these ambitions and why we do the things we do.
No, absolutely. Have you ever had to massively talk your way out of a bit of a mistake? Has there ever been a little lost note? Has there been a Boris Johnson Peppa Pig moment for you that you've ever had to kind of really think on your feet? Or, as well, sometimes you must get hit by something by the other side that, as far as you're concerned, has come out of nowhere, and that's their curveball. How do you deal with those things?
Do you know how we deal with it? We deal with it, if we're any good at this job, we deal with it the same way that poker players do. We get a bad card and, in the hand, and, we don't fall on the floor and start crying and screaming about it. No one would ever know that we had a bad card, although we thought it was a bad card. And I can answer you, I can help you in another way, because I have a bit of a strategy to deal with these things.
Oh, okay? Go on, here we go.
So if something comes out that from a witness that's deeply unexpected, and actually, on the face of it, you'd rather they hadn't said, rather than fall on the floor crying about it, what I do is go, that's very helpful, thank you very much. Let me make a very careful note of every word of it. And then the assumption is, of course, that I don't really care about it and I think it's helpful. And so, we all have these kind of different ways of dealing with things where they slap us in the face. Another one is to just go on the attack. I had a witness once in a case who, in an attempted murder case, a shooting case, who didn't in his witness statements or any of the other statements say that my client had allegedly shot him directly in the face or aimed the gun directly at his face. And in the middle of my cross-examination, he said, yeah, but then he aimed it directly at my face. Now, they'd never come out before, and I'm the one that's asking the question. So this is not looking so good on the attempted murder front. So you have a choice in that situation. Most people might be, oh dear, I don't know what's my response to that? My response was, you literally just made that up as you were speaking to this jury right this moment in the witness box. And of course, then the whole dynamic of the exchange rather changed. And I have to say, it would be rather surprising if someone who had actually had a gun pointed directly at their face had neglected to mention it in their first 5 witness statements. But there we go. That's how courtrooms work.
You would have thought so. And obviously you went into a successful media career as well. I've got some here, you've been on the One Show, you've worked with the BBC, etc. How did that happen for you? Where did you really start that? Why did you decide to branch out into the media?
The TV thing, to be honest with you, I met Adrian Childs, who some of your listeners will have heard of, through a friend of mine, and we got talking about law and justice, and he was absolutely fascinated by it, and he's a very sort of deep-thinking person. He's become a good friend of mine now, and he introduced me to a friend of his who was a producer, who was equally passionate about justice, and a few months later we pitched Crime Are We Tough Enough, which your viewers can watch on iPlayer if that's allowed to be said, and we were filming within a couple of months of that. So it was all one of those things that just happened. It started off over a couple of beers and turned into really quite an interesting project, and it's a series that I'm quite proud of. It's a good show, I think.
No, absolutely. Well, obviously, people are more than welcome to go and watch that. Of course they are. It sounds like you could learn rather a lot from it. Now, if it's all right with you, I'm just going to put a few of our viewers' questions to you, if that's OK. We do that every single time on this particular time of the show. So someone on Twitter, they've not actually left a real name on this anyway, so there's no point reading the fake one out. Can you be fined for not wearing a mask, and can you be prosecuted for refusing to pay? Do you have to give your name or details to those wanting to fine you? Gosh, do you have any answers for that?
These are good questions. The answer is that nobody really knows yet. As I understand it, what the government's done is have said that they are either going to introduce a regulation tomorrow or they're going to amend an existing regulation to mandate the wearing of masks, which if you don't follow that regulation, you could in theory be fined, not for a crime, but for a sort of civil penalty. So if they get all of their ducks in a row legally, then they'll be able to make it unlawful to enter a shop or other premises that are covered by the regulation. But they can't lock you in prison or anything like that.
Oh, good stuff. That's nice to know. That's a win. Well, Rose on Facebook has said, what can be done about the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories that are dominating the internet? I suspect Rose is asking there about whether or not it could become illegal or is illegal, I suppose, to post misinformation online.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting topic because you mentioned earlier that I've been involved in a lot of high-profile cases, and I have. And I have to say, I've sat in court all day and then come out of court and flick through Twitter or flick through the news feeds and realise that they're talking about the case I've been in court for all day, and it doesn't bear any resemblance to what actually happened, and the misrepresentation that goes on. I mean, just as a matter of common sense, if you think about it, in a court hearing, we could be in court for 4.5 hours. In a day, one day, and the trial could go on for several months. And the news headline is 6 or 7 or 10 words. So obviously it's going to be very, very difficult to capture the detail. But I think the answer from my point of view, in terms of the criminal justice system and the misinformation that's out there on social media and in the in the media more generally, is come to court and watch what we do. It's all anyone can come any day of the week, any day of the week, Monday to Friday. Come along, watch what really happens. If there's a high-profile case that you're interested in, go along to the court and have a seat in the public gallery and watch justice done properly and watch justice done for real. Now, for me, ultimately, I think they should have cameras in every single court in the land so that every single citizen can exercise their right to see what's done by way of justice in their name. That's my view. We're a long way off that happening. But you've got the right to walk into any court in the country anytime you want, and you can watch what's going on, and that's the best way to make sure you really know the way the justice system works.
No, I couldn't agree more, actually, because certainly when I was starting out as a local reporter, one of the main reasons, or in fact the reason really, why I had to learn shorthand up to 100 words a minute, ended up doing it to 110, don't like to go on about it, mate, but you know how it is. But I was so that when I was in court, I obviously wasn't allowed to record anything. So I had to make sure that I got everything right there. And then also, as well, when I was in court, there were numerous things, especially things like rape trials, for example. When someone's accused of rape, which is a very difficult thing to prove, naturally, in certain circumstances anyway, there's usually a big headline, a massive headline, so-and-so, accused of rape. Now, the way that the public can read that all too often is that they are guilty of rape. And then, as and when a not guilty verdict comes in, very often, especially in local media, you will get, a nib down the side with that person's name, so-and-so cleared. But actually, everyone in that community just remembers that first headline that says that. And so I think, actually, you're right. Cameras in court, for example, would be a big step forward. I think allowing journalists, not sure where they are now, it has been a while since I've been to court, but allowing us to record things in court so that we can actually go out there and make sure, be absolutely sure we can represent all the facts correctly, I think would be a big step forward. We've got another question for you here. We can just about squeeze it in. Lee on email has asked, does Chris have any particular view on Colin Pitchfork getting recalled to prison? How could those responsible for his release get this so wrong? What are your views?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken about this case quite a bit. I don't think the parole board got it wrong at all. It seems to me that what happened was that they did a risk assessment and a very substantial body of risk assessments and psychological profiles and everything else. And they decided that the only way that he could conceivably be safe to be released was if he had this whole range of conditions about what he could and couldn't do. Now, as I understand it, from what's in the public domain, he breached those conditions within a few weeks of being released and has therefore been recalled to prison. And that seems to me that's exactly how the system should work. If someone breaches the terms of their licence conditions, he's got a life sentence. In fact, he's got 2 life sentences. And that means that he is subject to being recalled any time until he dies. And for me, this is a classic example of the system working. He broke the rules. He knew the rules. He had to sign a piece of paper to say that he knew the rules, broke them, got locked up. And that's exactly how it's supposed to happen.
That's interesting. I mean, I know that a lot of people were saying as well that, look, what was the point in taking the risk with this guy, And yeah, all right, he had his conditions and he breached those, and maybe this is a case of it functioning, but, would they have maybe necessarily stopped him if it had only taken a minute for him to do something? But we'll never know, and thankfully he is back where he is now, I suppose. Just last one, actually. We've got a quick one for you, and then we will leave you to crack on with that wonderful gin palace that you've got behind you there. Does Chris think that Prince Andrew, should face the courts in the US to at least clear his name? What do you reckon to that?
Well, it's a very good question. I have to say, if I am a defence lawyer and I'm asked to advise clients, often very high-profile clients, and the answer is a very straightforward one. My advice to Prince Andrew would be don't go anywhere near the United States, because if you do, you're going to be arrested and you'll end up in prison. So obviously, if that's something that Prince Andrew wants to take on board, it's free advice from me. But the chances of him actually going to the United States and succumbing to the jurisdiction of the US, I think are very, very slim indeed. And if he did, he'd be very badly advised.
Chris, thank you. I really enjoyed that. I'm absolutely certain our viewers did as well. Have a cracking evening. We hope to speak to you again here very, very soon on GB News. Chris Daw there. One of, if not the country's leading lawyer. Fantastic stuff. Great to have him on board. That was Patrick Meeks. And thank you very much, everyone who got involved with your questions as well. Some crackers there. Well, coming up in the news agenda, why the word Christmas has been banned by civil servants. But after the break, it's FAQs, ladies and gentlemen. Do we take the NHS for granted? The author of How to Avoid Being a Victim of the American Healthcare System, Dr. David Wilcox, joins us next.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Now, the Health and Care Bill this week passed the final hurdle in the House of Commons and will now head to the Lords. It focused on restructuring parts of the NHS in England to create a, quote, truly integrated healthcare system that involves less central bureaucracy. Some say it poses a threat to free healthcare in the UK, with unions, doctors, nurses and MPs campaigning against it. After 28 years in the healthcare business, Dr. David Wilcox has written the book How to Avoid Being a Victim of the American Healthcare System, a patient's handbook for survival. It all sounds very ominous, doesn't it? Well, he joins me now, I believe, all the way from North Carolina. So hopefully we're going to get to David in just a second. I think he is. There he is. That's a reassuring sight. David, how are you?
Great, Patrick. Thanks for having me tonight.
Good stuff. We are indeed a truly global news station here. Thank you very much for joining us. So, look, let's just ground it, I think, for what a lot of our viewers will care about slightly more at the moment, which is exactly what's happening here, our system compared to yours, why we should maybe be happier with ours than we would be with yours. Do you feel that the NHS is being taken for granted in the UK?
I think that any socialized medicine platform where the government has the responsibility to look after the patient, I think drives the cost of care down. I think that they can negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. You definitely have better quality outcomes than we have here in America, that's for sure. So I think that the NHS is doing a much better job than the American healthcare system is. And the numbers prove that. I mean, we spend 17% of our GDP on healthcare, and we're dead last in quality outcomes from 11 industrialized nations. You guys spend about 8.7%, I think, on your healthcare. And so, we spend an awful lot of money, we just don't get the quality here.
That's interesting, because I suppose one argument to it is we're fronting up to something in this country that I think has highlighted an issue that I suspect, well, in fact, I know really, has been around for a long time, which is It's all very well and good having a National Health Service, but what's the quality of that National Health Service really like? And indeed, whether or not it can care for an ever-increasing population. And we're in a situation now, when it comes to coronavirus, where many people are having to pay for their own surgeries, not just routine operations, things like heart stents, for example, or spinal operations. And these do cost serious money. Is there an argument that you actually always need a little bit of a two-pronged healthcare system, a bit private and a bit social?
Yeah, I believe that that's the case. Here in America, really, money talks in healthcare. So if you have money, you're going to get good healthcare. You're going to be able to buy good insurance. So yeah, you're definitely going to see a two-pronged system anywhere you go. It's funny, when I was studying for my master's in healthcare administration, I was actually in Germany and Austria studying medicine, and the patients don't want to be in a private room over there, because if they're in a 4-bed ward, they have one nurse in the ward with them. So if something happens to them and there's an emergent situation, they know they're going to get care. Here in America, everybody wants a private room. So it's a different animal over here.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Now, one of the big things that people say in this country is, well, we wouldn't want an American healthcare system. We would never want an American healthcare system. And obviously, that seems to be something you're very well versed on. Why don't we want an American healthcare system?
So again, like I said, an American healthcare system does not distribute care equitably. It depends on what zip code you live in, the care you're going to get. It depends on how much money you have, the care that you're going to get. And when we look at the year 2020, we had a 1-year dip in life expectancy from 78.8 years to 77.8 years. First time that's happened since World War II. But it wasn't equitable. If you were a white American, your life expectancy went down 8 months. If you were Hispanic American, it went down 1.9 years. And if you were Black American, it went down 2.7 years because people can't access a healthcare system in an equitable way.
Talk to me a bit about Big Pharma. Certainly the COVID vaccine has, I think, exacerbated some people's concerns about Big Pharma. It certainly has over here. I'm not exactly sure what's going on necessarily in America. Is the world's health systems, is our health system, is your health system in the grip of Big Pharma?
Oh, definitely. And it's probably, well, I know it's worse over here than it is over there. So you guys, as an example, pay about $69 for EpiPen 2-packs. We pay $680 over here.
Wow.
And we pay 10 times more than any other country. And these are things that people have to have for shellfish allergies or peanut allergies to stay alive. My wife has to have them. And so it sets you back about $680. In this country, it's gone up 574% since 2006, where it would cost you $80 and now costs you $680. So Big Pharma really, well, they rule over here, but they also spend a lot of money. So in our 2020 election, they spent $43 million lobbying both sides of the aisle, Republicans or Democrats. Well, yep. So, they spend the money and they get the return on investment for sure.
So look, and this is genuinely a hypothetical question, but it's grounded in something that's happening at the moment with the coronavirus vaccine.
Okay.
Completely hypothetically, right? If there were issues with that vaccine, and these emerge down the line, do you think Big Pharma would tell us?
No, I don't think Big Pharma will tell you. What I think that they're trying to do now, so the flu shot that you get annually, that's a variant of the 1918 Spanish flu. So when they saw coronavirus start to hit, they knew they were walking into a 100-year strategy, right? So they've been giving those flu shots for over 100 years. Now, what they're trying to do is they're giving you the shot, the vaccine, which I encourage everybody to take. And now they're starting to talk about boosters. So what does the data really show around the boosters? It's interesting to note that if you look at the data funded by the pharmaceutical companies in the United States, you see a drop from 95% efficiency to about 72% over a 7-month period. If you look at the studies that happened in the UK, or Canada, you see a drop of about 95% to about 84%. So, anytime Big Pharma is footing the bill for a research study, the numbers are going to go in their favor. So now what they've got is they've got something they can have us take every 6 months, which doubles their profits. So, there's that to consider too. I'm not saying don't take the booster. I think, take the booster because it won't hurt you. But that's just the way Big Pharma thinks.
What about these new variants then? We've got Omicron over here now. I don't know if it's yet reached your shores. That's the latest one to emerge. Is this another way potentially that pharmaceutical companies can cash in? Is there a way that these new variants can help them profit?
Yeah, there's definitely ways that they can help them profit. And I'm not an epidemiologist, okay? Yeah. But what I've noted is that Delta was so infectious that you either A, got the vaccine and got your antibodies, or you got the virus, and if you survived it, you've got natural antibodies. So the variant that they're talking about in South Africa, the doctor who's treating patients says it's pretty much like a cold. You feel body aches and fever for about 2 or 3 days. They're not seeing severe illness with it. And we knew this is what happened with the 1918 Spanish flu, right? It dummied itself down into something that was more livable because people were walking around with antibodies to the different strains or variants that were coming out of that. So I think that's what we're going to see. It's going to become a nasty little thing that we've got to get a shot for every year, every 6 months, but it's not going to be the full-on raging pandemic that the world just experienced.
Okay, can I ask thank you very much for this, by the way. What time is it over where you are now at the moment then?
Right now it's 5:35 p.m.
PM, okay, good. Gosh, I was going to say if it was AM, then we have to pay you double. No, but I'm really joking. Thank you very much. That would really, really, really appreciate your time. And just give your book one last plug. I think it's worthwhile. I think you deserve it. What's it called? How can people get it?
Okay, so it's up on Amazon. I'm a self-published author. It's called How to Avoid Being a Victim of the American Healthcare System, a Patient's Handbook for Survival. And last week, I actually became a #1 international bestseller. There's a lot of information in this book that will help guide people. And if you really want to appreciate your NHS, you should pick a copy up, Patrick, and you should leaf through it because medical errors in our country was the 3rd leading cause of death up until COVID. So, I mean, it teaches people how to be safe in the hospital, teaches them what to do if their insurance company denies their bill, how to go after big pharma and reduce your costs. I've got a pretty interesting story, if time allows, about what we had. Okay, so this is what we had to do. We had a dog, an English setter. She was 16 years old, and she was starting to have some heart problems. So the vet prescribed Viagra. So what a lot of people don't know is Viagra is a pulmonary antihypertensive. I mean, it pulls fluid off your lungs. So once they found out its unintentional side effect, then the price skyrocketed. So without insurance or anything, yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right, don't worry.
We could go a lot of ways with that. But yeah, so...
for a very long time as well.
Yes, exactly. So my wife went to fill a month's prescription at a pharmacy, and the pharmacist told her it was going to be over $700. And my wife was like, this is crazy. Now, my wife is a nurse. So she went out and downloaded the GoodRx app to her phone, and she found it across town for $63. So if you can sell it across town for $63 and still make a profit, because pharmaceutical companies have to return 15 to 25% to their shareholders every quarter, then what are you doing selling it across town at over $700? Here in America, it doesn't matter. You go into one pharmacy, it's going to cost you maybe $50. You go into another pharmacy, your prescription is going to cost you $500. It's just craziness, and nobody regulates it.
Now, look, thank you so much. I thought this has been absolutely magnificent. It's Dr. David Wilcox, ladies and gentlemen, an Amazon international best-selling author and healthcare professional as well. How good was that, eh? Well, look, we're going to move away from that right now, and we're going to go after 11 p.m. anyway, in Uncensored, where we ask, does the word ladies make you feel unsafe? We'll be telling you exactly why that's the case, or indeed isn't. Joining us will be sociology professor Frank Farage. And on the news agenda, what is the situation and indeed the solution when it comes to knife crime, with the number of young people in London who have been killed this year set for yet another record high.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening, everyone. I'm over here now. Time now for the front pages. Yes, well, at this time, every single night, we bring you the first look at tomorrow's front pages, hot off the presses. So we're going to go to the Metro first, I believe. It's not too much to mask, that's what they say. This is the Metro, as Javid's new rules for commutes will be brought into action from tomorrow to help the UK tackle the Omicron variant. And we're going to go now to the Telegraph, so a bit of a shift in tone. They warn that curbs on the new variant of coronavirus will cause chaos in our schools. MPs have been warned pupils could be forced into isolation by these new rules. And we're going to go over to the Sun now. And the Sun reports that Prince Charles has called in lawyers after a new book claims he was the royal racist Harry and Meghan described in their interview with Oprah Winfrey. The paper reports that Palisades have blasted the allegations as fiction. Well, there we go, eh? Who would have thought that? Well, now, it's time to look at which headlines are breaking and which will be in tomorrow's news tonight in our news agenda. And joining me in a moment is my incredible panel. We've got Jason Reid, UK lead at Young Voices. We've got women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane and political commentator Andre Walker. Well, let's have a look at some of these topics, shall we? A Tory MP has branded a rule banning the word Christmas for fears it could offend religious minorities as ridiculous. So ministers apparently had planned a campaign to get students tested before returning to their families for festivities, but Cabinet Office officials have banned the slogan, "Don't take COVID home for Christmas." So, gosh, if there's not a nursery rhyme in that, I don't know where there is one. But Tory MP Saqib Bhatti, who is Muslim, disagrees. Now, he says, as a Muslim, I find it ridiculous that we can't enjoy this special time of year. I look forward to showing my new son his first Christmas tree. The idea you can't mention Christmas is completely ridiculous. It's time to celebrate, whatever your background. It's part of the British culture I love. It's the celebration of all cultures that makes this the most welcoming country in the world. So, should a campaign like this avoid using the word Christmas? Jason, I'll throw it over to you. I've started with you every time, so I see no reason why we shouldn't continue in this case. Can you see where they're coming from? Do you think that maybe it should just say things like festivities or, I don't know, Yuletide? That might even be worse. I'm not sure what the rules are.
It sounds like this came from a place of good intentions, but it's clearly misguided. No one's offended by the word Christmas. Even if you don't celebrate it, it doesn't make any difference if you see a TV advert with a slogan that mentions Christmas in it. This is just an example of people who work in Whitehall not really understanding what ordinary people in the rest of the country care about and what offends them and what doesn't offend them. And so spending a lot of time worrying about things like this, that no one's going to really take any notice of whether it says Christmas or not.
I mean, maybe the main argument was whether or not there should have been a campaign so don't take COVID home for Christmas, Kelly. I mean, maybe that's what we should have been having a discussion about, not because it's got the word Christmas in, the whole campaign's now.
It's just... It's offended on behalf of others again, isn't it? It's been going on since my kids were little, and they're quite old now. But with the nativity, people didn't like the nativity, and apparently Muslims were offended, and then Muslims were like, no, we're genuinely not offended. But it's all good-meaning, well-meaning people, isn't it? But they're just insanely stupid, really, to suggest that we don't say the word Christmas. And I think you're right about don't take COVID home for Christmas. I mean, what's Chris Rea going to sing about this year?
Yeah, exactly.
COVID home for Christmas?
Yes, I mean, I can imagine certain cultures as well being offended by was it the Norwegian Santa advert of him kissing another man? Maybe they would have been more offended by that, but we had to hear that. Look, Andre, do you think this is actually an attempt at scaremongering? That slogan, do you think that was an attempt at scaremongering?
Well, I think the whole thing is an attempt at scaremongering. I think the whole thing has gone completely over the top. We've lost our marbles. You know, nobody is interested in the fact that there is a public health epidemic caused by the lockdown in terms of mental health. But I'll tell you one thing that you've got to be very, very concerned about. We've seen it time and time again. You may or may not remember when Birmingham City Council banned the word Christmas and exchanged it for Winterval. And what was the first thing they said? We're doing it for the Muslims. Well, of course, what happens is these, white guys in Whitehall who have no idea about the Muslim community come up with all these bans and then blame the Muslims, who then, some of whom, get dog poo put through their letterbox for being anti-British. And I think it's really absolutely disgusting. Of course, there is one central point. Jesus is the Islamic prophet, and denying the existence of an Islamic prophet is haram anyway. Therefore,
you can't win.
The banning of Christmas would be anti-Muslim anyway.
Do you think there is... look, it's a relatively big question, this. Do you think there is an issue in this country when it comes to whether or not we are still a Christian country? Do you care, for example? Do you think we are? Is things like this and potentially looking to ban the word Christmas a symbol of maybe where we're heading?
That is a big question. You don't make it easy for me, do you? I think it's good that we're becoming more aware of these kinds of issues, that we're a multicultural country, we're no longer homogenous, we don't all think the same way, we don't all live the same lives, and that's a good thing. At the same time, this is not the way to express that. We've had this conversation many times before with the difference between Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. We all know that some people don't celebrate Christmas, and that's fine. It's not an issue anymore. It's not something that our civil servants should be spending time worrying about. It's just a non-issue.
No, what's your take on exactly that? Do you think that there is, in some quarters anyway, a push maybe for the de-Christianisation of this country, or are you not particularly bothered about that?
Well, I think I am. I think tradition is really important, and I think the legacy of whether you're Christian or not, and I'm not, I'm an atheist, but the legacy of sort of the Christian traditions running through our society, I think are really, really important. And I think we lose them at our peril. There are lessons throughout the Bible that I do think we all sort of parrot in one way or another. So to lose it, I think, would be a real shame.
OK. Andre, just in terms of the actual potential restrictions that we may or may not be facing on Christmas Day, do you feel as though that the public would go along with it now if it emerged that, you had to have similar restrictions that we had last year, for example? Or do you think...
Well, I would never advocate breaking the law, and I don't know if I've done it. That's because I never read any of the restrictions. so I think you're always a little bit safer. I think that actually now... what people understand and what people accept is this. A lockdown will work in the sense that if you never leave your home, you can never get a disease off another person, right, in general terms. However, I think what they've also felt is that this is the first social media pandemic, and effectively what's happening is people are locking down because it's a virtue signal. But let me just say one thing about the religion side of it. You and I have something in common in that we are unusual, in that we come from a Greek Orthodox Catholic family. There's not many of us.
Quite a mix.
There's not many of us. But I think part of the problem is that the Church of England does not stand up for Christianity. Now, Frankly, that doesn't particularly bother me, but we live in a country with an established church. The Church of England is supposed to be an official representative of this country, and I feel time and time again they don't do enough to stand up and say, look, Christianity, there's nothing wrong with it. Christmas is a good thing. Easter's a good thing. And actually, the Christian faith has been a positive force in the world.
Yeah, oh, well, there you go. We're going to move away from that now slightly. A primary school's been accused of brainwashing children into thinking parts of the media has a racist agenda against the Duchess of Sussex. So it's been reported that children at Birchfields Primary School in Fallowfield, which actually is just round the corner from where I went to my secondary school, were asked if Meghan would have haters if she was white, in a lesson described by some as one-sided. But the school's head teacher insisted the lesson was balanced, constructive and thoughtful, and many supporters of Meghan praised the lesson after photos of pupils' work was posted online. Look, Jason, let's start with you.
No, sorry, I've got to stop you on that introduction. I've got to stop you, right? Everybody knows that Fallowfield Primary School is going to be a very different place to the Manchester Grammar School.
Yeah, it is.
Even though they're very near
to each other. Oh, it is, but I'm just saying geographically, they're very close.
Geographically,
yes.
the geography means absolutely nothing. I'm very sorry.
There you go.
How on earth? Tell you what you wanted to do. You believe that the producers don't know the difference between those two facilities. Trying to be a man of the people, eh?
Mine founded in 1515, of course, with loads of rolling sports fields. I suspect a feeder into Oxbridge, one that I
suspect that Fallowfield Primary School's had very few people who've won the Victoria Cross.
Well, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But Jason, look, do you think... I mean, look, we've touched on this before a bit about a misogynistic agenda against Meghan. What's your views on whether or not there's been a racist agenda against her?
I don't know whether there was a racist agenda. Agenda implies that there was some coordinated conspiracy, which there wasn't. There was just a lot of anger, which I think was justified. But when it comes to the intense scrutiny and politicisation of what's going on in classrooms, I'm quite uncomfortable about that. It sounds to me like this lesson, that was a perfectly reasonable question to ask in a classroom. I don't want to go down the road that you've seen in some states in the US, where when they talk about the KKK, they're not allowed to say that the KKK did anything wrong, because that would be casting judgment on a sensitive issue, and you can't do that. So I think we have to have a little bit of trust in our teachers that they can make judgments as to what's OK and what's not in the classroom.
Is there a wider point here, Kelly, which is potentially that maybe there's, I wouldn't say brainwashing, maybe more virtue signalling potentially when it comes to children in this country? What do you make of it?
I think primary school, let's wait until all our kids are doing really, really well in their academic learning before we start talking to them about our own agendas. And I think the racism charge about Meghan, I think, is an agenda. I think it's a bizarre thing, like the word haters, let's not have that in primary school, used by teachers. But they are pushing agendas in primary school. We know they are, from my experience with the campaigns that I do. They are trying to teach children and definitely brainwash them into transgender ideology. We are losing sort of toilets. They're becoming unisex. So there are agendas, and I really don't think primary school is the place to have them. In fact, school, not at all. Thanks very much. Keep them out.
Andre, I'm not going to get you on this one because we've got to move on because we've only got a few minutes left, but I think this is a topic that you'll be keen to talk about as well. Teenage killings in London have reached an all-time high this year. It's been branded London's deadliest year for teenage killings in a decade. Now, last week, Rishmeet Singh of Southall became the 28th young person killed this year alone. It was reported that the 16-year-old was stabbed to death over a fake Gucci bag. The last time we saw a peak like this was in 2009, when 29 kids were killed in London. So I'm left, obviously, with the question, will we ever see an end to this solution? Andre, we do have a mayor. We do have a Metropolitan Police Force. Are they doing enough?
No, absolutely not. And they're not remotely interested. What they're interested in is politically correct agendas. Frankly, I always think that what we should do is try and come up with a new policing system to leave the Metropolitan Police up to what they're good at, which is running lesbian diversity training days. That's their principal interest, as far as I'm concerned. Right? So leave them to do that. They're very good at it, and I understand they're all excellent. I also think that there was something really sinister about all of this, because now the police commissioner for London is, of course, Sadiq Khan. It's combined in London and Greater Manchester. It's combined in London. But here's one thing. Sadiq Khan is brilliant brilliant at blaming other people for his personal failings. He has been the mayor for however long it is, 5 or 6 years, and the man has spectacularly failed. But I think there's another point on this, which I think is important. There has been an explosion in mental health problems amongst young people as a result of this lockdown. You know, I was walking through, I was walking through an area near me, in fact, Eton. So, I had to go at you, right?
Yes.
So
it's not Peckham, is it, mate? Yeah, there he is.
But of course, I saw under these railway arches, basically sort of teenage parties taking place during the lockdown. And you think these poor people have been locked up for 18 months. And by the way, they weren't pupils at the school. But you think to yourself, what happens when now there are no facilities for you, you're locked up permanently? I think this is part of the result.
Yeah, I can see that. Jason, I'll throw it to you then, which is that, you know, look, do you think Sadiq Khan cares as much about the death of often young, and actually, let's be honest, often young ethnic minorities on the streets as a result of violent crime, knife crime, etc., as he should do? You know, he seems very focused on whether or not we should be allowing President Trump into the country or whether or not we should be wearing masks on public transport. Should he care more about stabbings?
Bless him, poor Sadiq Khan. He's far too busy designing the fireworks display for New Year's Eve, with the EU flag and everything on there, so he's got no time to deal with these stabbings. I think I have a bit of a different take to Andre. I don't think it's an ideological issue. I think it's a competence issue. I think the Metropolitan Police in particular needs reform from top to bottom. The list of things that Cressida Dick, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, should have resigned for is very, very long indeed. At the top of the list being the handling of Sarah Everard's case and the aftermath of that. And this kind of issue, it won't be solved until we have some competent people in charge who, frankly, know what they're doing.
OK, Kelly, have we lost law and order, especially in our capital city?
Well, I guess we have, if so many young kids are getting stabbed. But I think that the whole violence in London, you have to go right the way back and work out where are these kids coming from, what's going wrong way before they get to a point that they're holding a knife. There's something else that's going wrong in those children's lives. I'm sure poverty doesn't help very much, fatherlessness, all of those sort of social reasons which get a child to that point. But it really does need sorting, and I guess, first and foremost, you need the police to sort it out. Yeah, and I can't help but wonder as well, when you see some areas now of the police force and you wonder whether or not they're too afraid to sort it out. They're getting copped left, for the best phrase, left, right and centre when it comes to things like stop and search. Stop and search is an inherently racist device and this, that and the other thing. You think it is a very, very tricky problem.
Can I pick you up on that?
Very quickly?
Yeah, because I've heard that a lot of police officers now are very reluctant to go to stabbing incidents because of being filmed on cameras and then uploaded for being racist.
And this can often be a thing as well. Well, look, coming up, tomorrow's front pages and Uncensored with Frank Farage. Thanks very much to our panel. They'll be sticking around, don't worry about that. But first, it's time for the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking to get off to a very cold and frosty start with icy stretches in places. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a dry, cold and locally icy start to the day across southwest England with bright or sunny spells in the east, but thicker cloud across Devon and Cornwall. It will also be very cold in southeast England, but there will also be plenty of sunshine and just a few coastal showers in the east. Any early brightness in the east of Wales will fade as cloudy skies develop more widely. It will stay cold, however, after an early frost for most. Northwest England will be very cold with icy stretches, especially where there is snow on the ground over the hills. Bright at first, but turning increasingly cloudy through the morning. Across into northeast England, and it will also be very cold to the start of the day here, with temperatures widely well below freezing and a risk of icy surfaces. Dry and bright though, with some sunshine. It will be a cold and frosty start in Scotland as well, but skies will generally be cloudier, especially in the west, where patchy light rain and hill snow is possible. Not quite as cold over in Northern Ireland, with generally cloudy skies and a few showery outbreaks of light rain, especially in the west of the province at times. Staying dry in most areas through the morning, with cloud increasing in the west, but staying bright or sunny further east. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We'll be taking a look at tomorrow's front pages. Then, of course, it's Uncensored with Frank Farage as we ask if the term ladies is offensive. And my panel, Jason Reed, Kelly J. Keane and Andre Walker, will also return to go through today's big stories in the news agenda. But next, it's time for your news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Tamsin Roberts. These are the latest headlines. A third person in the UK has tested positive for the new Omicron variant of COVID. The individual is thought to have visited Westminster before leaving the country. The government has brought in a series of new measures to try and curb the spread of it. From Tuesday, masks will become mandatory in shops and on public transport. And senior school children in communal areas will also have to wear face coverings. Meanwhile, travellers to the UK will need to quarantine ahead of a negative PCR test. And those who've arrived from red list countries must be tested and self-isolate for 10 days. Health Secretary Sajid Javid says despite the new regulations, there are no plans to cancel Christmas.
Given the number of mutations in this new variant, there's reason to think that it may be, and I stress the word may, that this variant may turn out to make our vaccines less effective. It may not. We just don't know enough.
G7 health ministers will meet tomorrow to discuss international efforts to contain the new variant. It comes as scientists shared the first image of Omicron. It isn't yet clear whether the new strain is a cause for concern, but the president of the European Commission says we should not take any chances.
We take this Omicron variant very serious, and we know that we are now in a race against time. Why that? Because we know not all about this variant, but it is a variant of concern. And the scientists and manufacturers need 2 to 3 weeks to have a full picture about the quality of the mutations of this Omicron variant.
A 14-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of 12-year-old Ava White, who was stabbed in Liverpool on Thursday. The boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, was also charged with possession of a bladed article. He's been remanded in custody and is due to appear in court tomorrow. 3 other teenage boys have been conditionally bailed as inquiries continue. France has called for Britain to allow a clear legal path for seeking asylum in the UK. It comes after European leaders met in Calais today to discuss the migrant crisis. Home Secretary Priti Patel was deliberately excluded after Boris Johnson enraged France by urging them to take back people who cross the Channel. 25,000 people made the journey to the UK this year. 27 died trying to do so last week. An EU border agency plane will now monitor the shores of the Channel for migrant activity. Stars of Formula One have paid tribute to motor racing legend Sir Frank Williams, who has died at the age of 79. The founder of the Williams Formula One team was admitted to hospital on Friday and passed away this morning. Reigning Formula One champion Lewis Hamilton says his legacy will live on forever. Well, you're right up to date. Now it's back to Patrick.
Good evening, everyone. It's just after 11 p.m. Uncensored in a moment, but first, this. And this time every night, there we go. Got to remember the pause. Never do. Always get shouted at for not doing so. At this time every single night, we bring you the first look at tomorrow's front pages, hot off the presses. We're starting with the Indie, the Independent, which leads with a hopeful quote from the Health Secretary. No need to change plans for Christmas. Fantastic. Or the festive season, whatever we have to call it now legally. As the Minister insists stronger curbs are not needed amid a third Omicron case found in the UK. We move over to The Guardian now. Booster scheme may be widened in order to tackle the Omicron spread. Experts could advise the government to roll out the booster programme to younger people and cut the waiting time for a third dose to less than 6 months. What do you make of that? Now we're going over to the Daily Express, so fair to say, slight shift in tone there. Vaccine makers say we can defeat Omicron variants. Now, in a separate story as well, the big freeze is coming. Temperatures are expected to plunge to minus 10 degrees. Greta Thunberg is going to be livid. And the Times reports that millions more people will be offered a booster jab to maximise protection against the new Omicron variant of coronavirus. Ministers continue to insist Britain will have a great Christmas. Well, there we go, a great British Christmas. The Mirror also reports on the fight to save Christmas. It reports doctors want face masks to be worn in pubs and in restaurants, and a third case of the new Omicron variant of COVID is found in the UK. So, there we are. And the Star goes, make mine a snowball, please, landlord, reports the Daily Star. Drinkers have spent their third night snowed into Britain's highest pub. Can I just say, this story is magnificent, by the way. Have a look at it online as well if you've not already. It's just gold, right? Punters got stuck at the Tan Hill Inn in the Yorkshire Dales on Friday. Apparently they went to see an Oasis tribute band and they've been stuck in the pub for 3 days, which is interesting, isn't it? Because that Liam Gallagher was often stuck in the pub for 3 days. So they've really actually gone after it, haven't they? Now we're going to go over to the Metro. It's not too much to mask, says the Metro, as Javi's new rules for commuters will be brought into action from Tuesday to help the UK tackle the Omicron variant. And we're over to the Telegraph now. The Telegraph warns curbs on the new variant of coronavirus will cause chaos in our schools. MPs have been warned pupils could be forced into isolation by the new rules. I do also wonder as well, just on this, sticking with the Telegraph, whether or not there's a point to be made as well about some of the new rules and regs that are going to come into place here. You know, there's a lot of very unionised, very well unionised public services in this country, isn't there? Could this be a little bit of a gift for them? We'll have to wait and see. Now, The Sun as well. The Sun reports that Prince Charles has called in lawyers after a new book claims he was the royal racist. Harry and Meghan described in their interview with Oprah Winfrey. The paper reports that Palisades have blasted the allegations as fiction. There we go. Well, that's your headlines. That's your latest headlines. Hot off the press. Don't say that we don't keep you up to date here on GB News. But now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Uncensored. Does the word ladies make you feel unsafe? Students at Wolfson College, Cambridge, complained that they were made to feel unsafe by a photographer taking pictures at a matriculation ceremony. That's definitely not a word you want to get wrong, is it? How did he make them feel unsafe? He dared to ask male students to help the ladies get down from a raised platform. The students claimed it created an atmosphere of inequality. It's interesting, actually. I also went to university with several people who were afraid of the word ladies, but that was for very different reasons, I think. Anyway, Frank Farage wrote about this in Spiked Online last week, and he joins me now. Thank you very much, Frank. Great to have you on the show. Now, what do you make of this story overall, then? You know, the idea now that potentially just using the word ladies can make some people feel unsafe.
But you have to remember that these days, feeling unsafe comes with the territory of university. A lot of people go to university and they've been educated into imagining that the world out there is very dangerous. And when you think in that kind of a way, then even the slightest criticism, anybody that puts a bit of pressure on you, is often interpreted as a threat to your very existence. And I've noticed last 15, 20 years in the universities that every single year, the academics give the impression that being in higher education is the most dangerous place in the world. And they often talk about rape culture. They talk about the fact that it's very unsafe for students here. And what it really is a kind of exaggerated, inflated sense of insecurity that's focused on every single word. And the second aspect of it, which is often not noted, is that when students kind of begin to think that being unsafe is like part of their identity, then they make a virtue out of it, and often they perform feeling insecure. So when they hear a word like ladies, instead of letting it go, instead of being generous and saying, well, we'll forgive the guy for saying this, instead of doing that, they say, oh yeah, I'm very unsafe, I feel threatened, and they make a big deal out of it. And I think that's...
Yeah, have we not got a problem here, Fran? Which is that actually, all too often, unfortunately, in our society, women are unsafe, and women do feel unsafe. And you could argue there's loads of times at universities, especially if there's a heavy drinking culture, a heavy drug-taking culture, where late at night, women might find themselves in very vulnerable situations, and indeed very dangerous situations, and those are unsafe. There are also just naturally dangerous people out there, and undoubtedly some of those will work in the education system. There are stories as old as time itself of people in positions of power, i.e. lecturers or seminar tutors, abusing that position vis-à-vis some young women. But actually, does this now diminish the notion of what it means to be unsafe? So if someone just throws around, he called me a lady and now I feel unsafe, does that diminish what it actually means to be unsafe?
Well, it does, because we trivialize the threats, the real threats to our existence. And you have to remember that despite the scare stories that you hear now and again, by and large, life in higher education is really, really safe. When you look around, there's all these rules. People are very careful. They're very scared of even encroaching on each other's body space. And I think under those circumstances, what happens is you become addicted to being safe, which means that you can never feel safe. So the quest for safety becomes almost like a problem, because you continue looking for safety. And I don't know if you heard of the expression safe space, which is flourishing on campuses.
Yes.
But the very idea that people look for safe spaces means that they imagine that anything outside of that safe space is by default dangerous, unsafe. And I think under those circumstances, we trivialize the problems that confront us, and we almost make a virtue out of saying, well, I don't feel safe, just as a way of drawing attention to yourself. And I'm very critical, because what we're doing is we're ruining a whole generation of young people to the point at which they fail to make a distinction between the real threats and the problems of their own making.
Yeah, and we can't tell them, for want of a better phrase, to man up, can we? We can't tell them to grow a pair. We can't tell them that actually you're being a bit weak about this particular issue. You need to grow up. You need to learn to take some things on your chin. We can't do that, can we, unfortunately? Because it appears that whenever anyone goes to anyone else and says, I feel unsafe, I now want jazz handing instead of clapping because the loud noise can make me jump. I want all this stuff. I want everything to be a designated safe space. I want every single person in my lecture to have taken an unconscious bias exam and got 100% of it based on what my definition of white privilege means, for example. That cannot be the world that we want to live in, surely.
No, which is why I think people like you and me have got to use expressions like man up, even though that's called toxic masculinity.
Oh, you think we should?
And we have to. I think we should be true to ourselves, and we should tell a 19, 20-year-old guy to get real, and not just kind of sort of flatter them saying, oh yeah, you're a poor little thing, you're very sensitive, I don't understand it. I think it's our job as adults to tell them that there's a real world out there and they need to have a bit of pressure put upon themselves. And they need to take themselves seriously instead of hiding behind these affectations of insecurity. I don't see why we shouldn't do that, because if we don't, then we become complicit in creating a culture where people become essentially paralyzed and unable to deal with the real challenges that confront them in everyday life.
OK, Frank, I'm going to, if it's all right with you, just bring in my superstar panel who've been here with me, listening diligently throughout the show. I'm going to go... There they are. Look at those resplendent, wonderful faces. Jason Reed is UK lead at Young Voices and, of course, women's rights campaigner Kelly J. Keane and political commentator Andre Walker. Kelly, let's mix it up. Let's start with you. Have you got anything you particularly would like to ask to Frank, who's here now?
Yeah, Frank, clearly this problem is in universities, but it starts way before that. What do you think schools for younger children can actually do to foster a little bit of resilience in the kids?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think the real problem kicks in when they're 9, 10, 11, and what schools do is that instead of challenging young kids and stretching them and cultivating their capacity for independence, we almost try to validate them. So I remember when my son used to go to school, you know, he'd come back every single day with 20 smiley faces. And you think that he was like the nicest boy in the world. But all that was happening is that he was never criticized. He was never questioned, was never put under any pressure. And like all the other children, as a result of that, they become unable to really deal with pressure, deal with the challenges of everyday life. And I think what we're doing is instead of cultivating their capacity for freedom and for being active, what we're doing is we're making them powerless, and we're telling them it's a difficult world, you know, sort of you're vulnerable, you're weak, you're powerless, you know, we're here to help you. And every time I talk to a teacher, they always say, we're here to give you support. Actually, the last thing that kids need is support. What they need is to be stretched a little bit. What they need to be stimulated and encouraged to stand on their 2 feet.
Andre, anything from you?
Yeah, why is it always the absolute hounds at university that are into this sort of stuff? Look, and I make that as a serious point. People who actually seem to have fun at university, have friends at university, are on the more attractive end and not interested, whereas it's the marginal people who just, I think, cause trouble.
Well, unfortunately, what used to be the marginal people are now in the mainstream. And I think the administration of universities have brought in all these rules and regulations, which make it very difficult to be normal, to be relaxed, to be spontaneous, to kind of banter and to, you know, sort of give and take and to, you know, sort of discover each other. And what has happened is that because of the new rules that have been brought in, people are really wary of coming close to one another, of getting it on with one another in the way that universities used to be like. And as a result of that, we've all become the marginal characters have become the role models for all of us, which has become a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah. And Jason, what's your take on this? Have you got any questions?
Well, Frank, we hear a lot of these kinds of stories, don't we, of students overreacting to something innocuous someone said or cancelling an event with a controversial guest. But don't you think that some of this is just students adapting to the world there? I mean, a lot of these are very, very young people. We're talking about 18, 19-year-old people here, and they're entering adult life for the first time. They're reacting, possibly overcorrecting for issues that they see in the wider world. And then as they get older and they gain a bit more life experience, some of those more radical elements might just drain away by themselves, meaning it's not really a problem for wider society.
Well, I think the problem is never the students. I think the students are the product of an education system, a school system, that disempowers them when they get to university. I think the problem is the university administration that flatters them and infantilizes them. Instead of treating them like young men and young women, they treat them like, you know, girls and boys, which is, you know, horrible. And I think that as a result of it, what happens is that people can spend 3-4 years in a university, and when they leave, instead of being able to stand on their 2 feet and think for themselves, they still become fairly dependent on people around them and looking for support all the time. And to me, the tragedy is that when you talk to employers, when they get these young kids coming into, you know, to the workplace, they bring with them all the baggage that's been imposed upon them by the education system. So for us, and in a sense, the problem is not the students, they're great, and many of them are absolutely fantastic. The real problem is the institutions, which institutionalize a sense of powerlessness and encourage young students to be obsessed with their identity and to be obsessed with their gender and their sexuality, instead of making them aware of their accomplishment, of what they can achieve with their two hands. And that, to me, as an academic, is a real tragedy, something I'm really committed to challenging, because our job as educators is to cultivate people's capacity for independence and strengthening on your 2 feet, rather than being, somehow this kind of powerless, dependent individual.
And also, presumably as well, not creating the idea or the notion that anyone of a certain age is now no longer worth listening to because they're outdated and they're behind the times. It seems to me as though we're losing a lot of the accumulated wisdom of people of a certain generation in this nation because we're giving in to the whims, the rather pathetic whims, in my opinion, of some of the people in a younger generation. Would you go with that, Frank?
Absolutely. I remember I was giving a lecture in New York just before the first lockdown, and I got into an argument with these American students. And this woman comes up to me and says, Frank, you're old, you just don't get it. And I just said, actually, I do get it, but I think you're wrong. And I just think that what we got to do is, instead of being defensive about it, explain to them that we have a knowledge, you have a knowledge, let's have a dialogue with each other, and don't try to treat us like children, because we have experience that you could learn from just as much as we can learn from you and your kind of youthful kind of experiences.
Frank, thank you so much for your time, especially what is such a late hour. Frank Farage there, the wonderful Frank Farage in Uncensored, where we were discussing, of course, the fact that now, in some circles, certainly academically, the word lady is actually offensive. It can make you feel unsafe. Well, look, we've got loads still coming your way. In the news agenda after the break, should the latest series of I'm a Celebrity be scrapped? It's been chaos from start to finish, hasn't it? We'll have a look at all of that. But it's time now to look at which headlines are breaking and what will be in tomorrow's news tonight in our news agenda.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, good evening. Well, it's time now to look at which headlines are breaking and what will be in tomorrow's news tonight in our news agenda. So, India Knight, in her Sunday Times column, our children are losing their ability to argue. And this is what she wrote. Sometimes, too, big, insulting, very loaded accusations are chucked carelessly about by the children. As a result, many parents of teenagers I know, and by many I mean nearly all, feel it's just not worth the hassle of having these conversations. Essentially, parents are scared of their own kids now. And as a result of that, an awful lot of young people don't know how to argue their case when faced with views that differ from their own. They're able to air an opinion, but not to defend it objectively or intellectually at any level. Well, she spoke of political and cultural debates being a thing of the past for many families at the dinner table. She acknowledged that woke young people's care for things like more important things, arguably anyway, and highlighted the importance of respecting one another's feelings. Well, panellists, is she right? I think it's a really, really unique situation that we're in at the moment, isn't it? Where there are big things that can be levelled at people. Like, if you have a view on what's going on in the channel, you're a far-right racist. If you have a view at what's going on regarding the trans lobby, you're transphobic. And actually, instead of just lobbing those things out there to silence debate, to stifle debate, Jason, shouldn't we be able to have these conversations?
That sounds to me a little bit like snowflakery, I'm afraid.
Oh.
I think parents are just upset that they're being called out by their kids on some of their outdated views, and they're upset about the fact that their kids have different priorities than they did. Perhaps the kids don't want to take up the family business, or they want to do things different to what their parents did. And their parents, you know, when you get to a certain age, perhaps you can start to feel a little bit entitled. Back in my day, we had it so much harder than you, and that kind of thing. And the kids are quite rightly pushing back against that.
Do you think that's a really interesting one? Because I suspect one of the points that she was getting at there is if a parent said, you know, expressed a view, you know, on something like integration or something like that, for example, just spitballing here, you know, would the child be inclined, do you think, more now to stifle debate? Or do you think that they are actually, what's actually happening is parents are being presented with arguments they've not heard before?
I think it's parents being presented with arguments they've not heard before. And Generation Z in particular have a very interesting way of approaching these kinds of issues. There's been a lot written about TikTok culture and the culture around satirising a lot of these hot-button social issues and debates. And other generations struggle sometimes with that because they're not familiar with that way of discussing things, that way of thinking about it. But that doesn't mean that people don't know how to argue. It's just that they see the world in a different way, and that's what you'd expect to a generation.
Your take on this?
Well, I don't know too many people who have a family business to pass on, but my view is that parents have stopped being parents. They've started to try and being friends with their kids, even little kids. So my oldest is 20. I remember the first cake sale I went to, and my son waited in line like a normal person, and all of the middle-class, sharp-elbowed mothers sort of wanted little Johnny to get to the front to have the best cake. And so those kids, right from the off, they're like, you're the most important child.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then they can't take it when their kids actually become a product of their parenting, which is an obnoxious child who can't listen to another point of view.
Well done for not swearing. Andre, your thoughts?
Well, look, I've got to say, my late grandmother and I used to have regular disagreements. So I think that different generations, and let me tell you, she made me look like a communist, right? she had a variety of views related to immigration, none of which I'll explain on this show. But actually, on a serious note, I do think that there is a point here which I think different generations will move on in terms of their views on society. But one thing that really annoys me more than anything else with the younger generation, look, the nature of human civilization is that we continually move forward. Therefore, my views, one would hope, would be more eloquent and knowledgeable than my grandmother's because society has moved on. The idea that people in the past were evil just because they weren't aware of everything you were aware of, I think is a really nasty element of modern society today.
Yeah, I'm concerned, though, that we are heading towards a situation where one viewpoint is the only thing that's allowed to be discussed. I mentioned a little bit earlier when it came, for example, to some of the quote-unquote science around COVID, the reasons behind why we have some of these restrictions. It's almost becoming illegal to actually question whether or not those scientists are always correct. I'm concerned about a similar thing happening when it comes to the big green agenda in the environment. Are you going to be able to actually question the science behind it. Now, you can argue with the rights and wrongs of it. You can argue with whether or not, in anyone's opinion, there is an obviously correct way of looking at one of those, both of those things. That's fine. But if we're headed towards a situation, Jason, where potentially we're not really allowed to discuss those things, I'm concerned by that.
I'm afraid I don't buy into this narrative. You can question anything you like. If you say something that's obviously wrong and everyone disagrees with, you'll get called out for it. But that's exactly how it's supposed to work. That if you were to question on your show the science of coronavirus, for example, I think it's very unlikely that the police would turn up at your door and say, we've got to take you off air now. It's just you probably get called out on Twitter, quite rightly, and that's the way debate is supposed to function. I go back to the same point as before. I think a lot of people are guilty of snowflakery on this. They just don't like the fact they're being criticised. They want the right to a platform without anyone else having the right to free speech as well.
That's OK, but at the same time, though, Kelly, it is easier than ever to get cancelled, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's very easy to get cancelled. If we look at someone like Professor Kathleen Stock, she had to resign after lots of young people decided to harass her in her place of work until she did resign. And so I don't think it's quite as simple as adults are being snowflakes against teenagers' demands. I think what's happened is teenagers are supposed to rebel against us and we're supposed to be the adults and remain firm. That doesn't mean that we don't listen to our teenagers. That just means that we kind of we know best. We've lived on this earth a little bit longer. As long as we listen to the arguments, I really don't think that adults saying to kids, actually, you're still kids, you need to learn a little bit more, is snowflakery.
Do you think that parents have lost discipline in the home, Andrea? Because I see it quite regularly now where, there's these parents wandering around and you go, which one's your child? You see them playing around, don't you? And it's like there's one there that's just playing with the toys nicely, and there's another one that's making the other child try to eat a toy and kicking them in the back of the head and, doing all this stuff. And they go, oh, isn't he spirited? No, he's naughty, right? He's a very naughty boy, to quote a famous one.
But you always used to see on TV, they'd go, well, he was a cheeky chappy.
He was a cheeky chappy.
He was a delinquent.
Yeah. He had an asthma attack at the age of 6, all right? There were issues there.
But you know what? When you're talking about getting cancelled, so, look, I got cancelled from a well-known television show, right? I got banned from going on for the following thing. They had a video of a nurse talking about how she couldn't buy any food in the shops during coronavirus and would have to starve that night. And I was asked the question by the presenter, why do you think she said that? And I said, because she's wrong. Yeah. Right? And I said, look, fundamentally, they've been pushing that there is a Brexit famine. They've been pushing there's going to be a coronavirus famine, right? And none of it's come true. But actually, I think that's where you see, if you go against the narrative, you can get into very serious trouble. And I think that actually, it's an element of bullying. I said this earlier in the show. I think that because the socialist economic system has been so badly discredited, the socialist political system's been so badly discredited, the only way they can push it is by shutting you down and stifling debate.
Well, there we are. We're going to move on now onto something very highbrow. There are fears I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here could be forced off air for days following storm damage to the production site. So the celebrities were evacuated from the Welsh castle and the episodes over the weekend were cancelled. Talking of cancel culture, the weather did it for us. It still remains unclear how much damage the winds, which were close to 100 miles an hour, have caused to the technical equipment. All of this, of course, follows Richard Madeley's departure from the castle last week, doesn't it? Storm damage and evacuated celebs, etc., etc., etc. Is there any point actually continuing with the show this year? Is anyone here going to put their hand up and say they're a regular watcher of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here? Not a sausage.
Yeah,
go on, here we go.
I'd miss it if it was gone.
You'd miss it if it was gone. Talk me, go on. Should it be cancelled this year, though?
Well, this year it's been incredibly shambolic. You mentioned just a couple of things. There are even more stories than that. There was an intruder on set who had to be removed. I think a couple more celebrities have had to leave after Richard Madeley, although we don't know that because it hasn't been on air for 2 nights now. So it's been pretty shambolic. It would be understandable if it was cancelled this year, but it's one of those things that it comes at the same time every year. I remember when I'm a Celebrity is on, more than I remember what month it is. It sort of punctuates the year a little bit. Is it I'm a Celeb time? Is it Strictly time?
Yes.
It's just one of those staples in times of chaos, in times of pandemics. You can rely on it. It's always going to be there. It's always exactly the same. I find it quite comforting.
Kelly, do you think you do well on I'm a Celeb?
Oh, my God, no. No. The food, nothing about that is enticing.
Not about not even the money?
I genuinely don't know how much they'd have to pay me to go anywhere near a spider or a bug or even the other people in the camp.
Or even the other people in the camp.
Yeah, not for me at all. I don't think I'd miss it. I think if it's cancelled,
Do you remember when Celebrity Big Brother, they put somebody in who wasn't a celebrity? Yeah. They were just a member of the public, and they said, you've got to put yourself in order of fame, and she didn't come last.
No, she didn't come last, and she won, I think.
Yeah, she did.
win.
She won,
and she married that Preston guy, who, by the way, once again, nobody had heard of. I'll tell you what he said. I saw an interview with him, which I thought was brilliant, when they said, you were the best-dressed man in that house. How did you do it? And he went, I went to Bicester Outlet Village the week before and just bought everything in one go. And I thought, nothing says rock and roll quite like Bicester Outlet Village.
Absolutely, yeah, living on the edge there, isn't he? Living on the edge. No, so I think what I like about I'm a Celeb is that it highlights a lot of your phobias, right? So I'm terrified of spiders, but to like a completely nonsensical degree, which I think really is what makes it a phobia, right? Do you know who got any phobias? You.
Spiders as well.
Is it? OK.
Spiders.
Oh, hello. They're not faring well. We're going to have, like, the Spider Preservation Society on at some point, eh?
I don't like those stinky Extinction Rebellion people. I have an irrational fear of being near any of them. I'll tell you what I did once. I got onto a train from Manchester to London, and it stopped at Stafford, and they'd all been to one or other festival. Oh. It was like a stink convention.
Oh, yeah.
It was disgusting. Yeah. Everyone had a different odour. That was bad.
No, all right. Well, fair enough. It's one way of looking at it, I suppose. We're going to veer away from that and towards the President of the Czech Republic. That's right, don't say we don't give you range on this show. So the President of the Czech Republic has appointed his new Prime Minister from a glass box. Yes, really. There he is. Look at him. Hang on a second. I mean, he looks well.
It's like Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, it is, actually. It is, yeah. So Anthony Hopkins, the President of the Czech Republic, contracted COVID after a 6-week stay in hospital for an unrelated illness. So Czech rules require a COVID-positive patient to self-isolate for 2 weeks. So he appointed his new Prime Minister from a stateroom inside his official residence. I think surely they should just have waited. Andre, has the world gone mad?
I keep thinking, hello, Clarice.
Yeah.
that is dreadful. Although, you know, I said earlier I'm a Catholic, and we got away with the Pope-mobile for all those years.
Well, we did.
Which was equally ludicrous.
Yes.
But look, I think, for me, and I know this might sound controversial, for me, I think if you are a leader, whether that be in any time of crisis, obviously thinking particularly about the military, I think you've got to go into battle, figuratively or literally, and I think people should stand up and show that they're not afraid. I just think that sends an awful message.
Yeah, although I think he was in a wheelchair, so he possibly couldn't stand up and show.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't. Look, I mean, to be fair, it's a question mark about which bit's going to fall off next. Yeah. But, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of an old Peugeot 205 in the hands of a 17-year-old driver. Like, it's been razzed to bits, hasn't it?
We wish him well. But, Jason, you know, look, I suppose there's an argument, isn't there, of our leaders have to send a message. Any leader has to send a message. The Queen's done it quite well at times, let's be honest, you know, about stoicism and this, that and the other. What message does that send, do you think?
Well, I feel sorry for the population of the Czech Republic. If you're a Czech person and you're patriotic and this ceremony is supposed to be a big thing in national politics, and this is the ridiculous theatre that you've got showing the rest of the world, this is how we do politics in our country. But at the same time, if it was the Queen in that situation, I think we would probably want absolutely everything to be done possible to protect her, even if that means the ridiculous situation where you have people, you know, in almost riot gear to cart her in, make sure no one else breathes near her.
It's maybe only a matter of time. We can see it there, boss in a box. There he is. Look at that. I mean, it's all a bit weird, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Prince Philip died and the Queen had to go to the funeral and sat away from everyone, I think we all thought that was absolutely balmy. This is next level insanity. Just the fact that he's wheeled in and out as well into the glass box. I would have maybe liked to have seen a moulded perspex thing just around the chair.
There's a touch of
I think that would have been better.
the Lenins about him, isn't there?
I saw then, I've only just spotted it on the screen in front of me, the hazmat suit bloke who brought it. Yeah. I mean, come on. You know what they should have done? They should have had like a waxwork of him, just with a mouth opened and
Or done it by Zoom.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a hologram. Or a hologram. Yes, we've got, there he is, what's happening again. The hazmat man's back. It could be hazmat woman. There's no way of telling. Hazmat thing. There we are.
Do what Saddam Hussein did, where he got people to have facelifts to make them look like Saddam Hussein, and he'd send them into the difficult situation.
I do remember the catalogue of Saddam Hussein lookalikes. Yeah. How did it end for him? Oh, no. Anyway, so look, we're just going to on to something slightly lighter. This is, if you consider, this is the moment a man is almost swept away by Storm Arwen over the weekend. Look, just take a look at this. So there we are, If you missed it the first time, storm, big wave. And it's at this moment that John realised he'd really messed up. So yes, no, it's terrible. I liked the one that came out a few years ago about a news reporter in America where she was in a similar situation, actually, and she got hit in the face by a fish. So a massive wave has come through, you know, and then all of a sudden a fish slaps her on the side of the face.
Did you see that one, the BBC journalist, who very serious guy, who was there where they were burning heroin to get rid of it in Afghanistan?
Oh,
he got absolutely off his face.
Yeah.
He was just sort of laughing away.
I did think that was quite funny, although it did make me wonder whether or not he wasn't already aware of what might happen.
Yeah.
But there we go.
I'll tell you what, let's stand by some smouldering heroin. That's a good idea.
Yeah, let's not the best look, I think, not the best look. But anyway, that's it for the moment. Anyway, coming up in the news agenda, the couple who travelled 31 hours to a football match only for it to be postponed by snow. But bear in mind they were Spurs fans, so they should be used to the crippling disappointment by now. Make sure you stay tuned, we've got the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking to get off to a very cold and frosty start with icy stretches in places. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a dry, cold and locally icy start to the day across southwest England, with bright or sunny spells in the east, but thicker cloud across Devon and Cornwall. It will also be very cold in southeast England, but there will also be plenty of sunshine and just a few coastal showers in the east. Any early brightness in the east of Wales will fade as cloudy skies develop more widely. It will stay cold, however, after an early frost for most. Northwest England will be very cold with icy stretches, especially where there is snow on the ground over the hills. Bright at first, but turning increasingly cloudy through the morning. Across into northeast England, and it will also be very cold to the start of the day here, with temperatures widely well below freezing and a risk of icy surfaces. Dry and bright though, with some sunshine. It will be a cold and frosty start in Scotland as well, but skies will generally be cloudier, especially in the west, where patchy light rain and hill snow is possible. Not quite as cold over in Northern Ireland, with generally cloudy skies and a few showery outbreaks of light rain, especially in the west of the province at times. Staying dry in most areas through the morning, with cloud increasing in the west, but staying bright or sunny further east. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening, everybody. Now, let's return to the headlines that are breaking right now and tomorrow's news in the news agenda. So joining me on my rock star of a panel this evening, of course they are, but there's fears that schools will be forced to break up for Christmas early to try and slow the spread of coronavirus. So this comes as the Department for Education rules secondary school pupils and staff should wear face coverings in communal areas. Thousands of children across the country have already switched to remote learning as increasing numbers of pupils and staff test positive. So, should schools finish early for Christmas? Where to start with this one? Jason Reed, what do you think?
I think that ideally we'd keep all the schools open. If this was what's required to save Christmas, then I'm all for it, because it seems like it's not the most damaging of the COVID restrictions. You were talking earlier, Andre, about the mental health effects of lockdown. Closing schools for a couple of weeks in the lead up to Christmas would probably be seen as an extension of the holiday rather than missing out on a huge amount of education. I don't know about you, but in the last couple of weeks at the end of the year, I didn't learn very much anyway.
No, that's true.
The teacher would usually put a film on. I worried that we're...
What, for a month?
Just one Lord of the Rings film.
I worry that we're replicating what happened last year, where, of course, the scientists were saying to Boris Johnson, we need to have a quick circuit breaker lockdown in order to save Christmas, and he delayed it and delayed it, and the result was that there was still Tier 4 restrictions over Christmas. And so if we're able to do something small like this now to protect Christmas, that would seem to me to be a good thing.
Well, Kelly, you are a parent, of course. Presumably at some point your children went to school. So I imagine that if there was a 2-week extra holiday, that might have an impact on your life, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but I'm quite lucky, so I don't have a job that I'm going to lose if I don't go in.
Right.
Whereas that's not the same. And I think they decided that 11-year-olds could be at home on their own. I just don't... I don't think it's good. I think the poorer children miss out. There are many children living quite chaotic lives as it is, and they just have a little break from that, from 9 until 3. So I'd like to see schools stay open specifically for those kids and for the sanity of parents.
Andre?
Well, do you know something? I went into my local computer repair shop. You know, people kind of never used to go into these places. But I walked in and there was a middle-class couple who went in with, I think, 4 laptops. When they'd got a newer one, they'd left the old one knocking about. And they were getting all 4 of them being repaired. And I thought to myself, actually, if you've got mum and dad working from home and, say, 2.4 children working from home, then that is 5 computers. Now, frankly, I live in a rich area. How many people from the Scunthorpes of this world, from the, Astleys of this world, are going to be able to come up with 5 computers to do all this stuff from home? I heard of an example on a programme about London where basically the only internet connection this particular family had was on dad's mobile phone, and they had 1 laptop. So basically they had to do all the schoolwork when he tethers in the evening. And I think we're forgetting the class divide. The haves and the have-nots has massively expanded. I give a similar example. My mother fell ill during the coronavirus, and we were able to negotiate with the doctors to make sure she got the best possible treatment. Other people who were on their own just got condemned to the coronavirus ward and got left on their own to die. The haves and the have-nots have pulled apart, and I think this education thing makes it worse.
OK, all right. We're just going to stay on this for one more. Jason, is there an argument in your mind to say that maybe it's the best thing to do to allow COVID almost to rip through schools and to rip through that? Because actually then our children can build up some elements of natural immunity.
Well, it's hard to say with this new variant going around. We don't know much about it. We don't know how deadly it's going to be. We don't know the transmissibility, whether it has a degree of vaccine resistance. And so I think, as far as possible, it makes sense to stay on the safe side a little bit. I think, as I say, closing schools for a couple of weeks before Christmas is not the end of the world. Those issues that you both have been talking about are very real in terms of if we were going to do this for any longer. Yeah. But I'm just very worried about Christmas. I can see it coming already.
I can tell you are very worried about Christmas. You got big plans?
I've got big plans in terms of a huge Italian meal.
I tell you what, I'm jealous. I'm in here on Christmas Day. Christmas morning.
So am I.
Are you? Hey,
No, I'm in on Christmas Eve. Well, actually, we shouldn't do this.
I'm on Christmas Eve, I'm on Christmas morning, I'm on Boxing Day.
Do you know what? What a great show it is with Dolan the way. We're literally talking about our shifts. This is going to fascinate the public.
No, but I'm wondering what we all have planned, because for me, I'd technically be bracketed as a key worker, so if Boris wants to slap another lockdown, then it doesn't bother me. I'm still in here. But Kelly, do you think that there's a risk, a potential, dare I say it, that unionised teachers might use a new risk of a new variant to try and take more time off the actual classroom side of things?
Oh, I don't want to be disparaging about hard-working teachers, but look, I had 2 kids, so I've got 4 children. My youngest 2, they were still in school, and I can honestly say I have no idea what those teachers did for the months that my kids weren't in school, because they didn't do online lessons. They didn't bother marking anything. It was absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with you. Although obviously this was higher education, when I did my rather ill-fated law course during the first lockdown, I didn't see my lecturers or any of my classmates for the entirety of a second term. I could not pick a single one of my lecturers out of a lineup.
But
and that wasn't just because I didn't attend.
Do you know? I'm going to say something that's going to sound incredibly bratty, but I think I think this has proved where parents who go for private education actually how lucky they are, because traditionally it's just been all it is just a bit of extra money and rah, rah, rah. The fact of the matter is, because the private schools were charging bills, they had to motivate their teachers and they had to get the work done. And what's happened is, remember, we pay an awful lot in this country to these state schools, and they just all, well, they didn't all, but a large number of them just went, oh, well, hey-ho, we can't do it, never mind. No. Now, you know, that didn't happen in the private sector.
No. It did near me. At Marlborough, apparently, didn't do anything.
Oh, really? Oh, well, there you go.
But then again, that school's famous for it just being full of party animals.
Wasn't that Kate Middleton?
Yeah, I think she did.
Wow, oh, God. Well, there we are. Right, OK, so I'm a northerner.
Yes.
You're a northerner. Where are you from, if you don't mind?
I'm from the West Country.
From the West Country, yourself?
Italian. So.
You're just straight up Italian. Well, anyway, apparently, in case you were thinking, gosh, that Patrick guy, he looks like a proper northerner. Gosh, that Andre Walker, he's definitely a proper northerner. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what a proper northerner looks like. Hey, there he is. It's Burnley manager Sean Dyche casually strolling out in what looked like a blizzard at Turf Moor yesterday. This was for Burnley's clash against Tottenham. It was postponed, actually, in the end, due to the heavy snow covering. Of course, he decided not to put his jacket on. I mean, why would he?
Do you know, talking of proper northerner, my brother is the stadium announcer at Burnley.
Right, there you go. Right, so we're definitely going to talk about that in a second. But it was unfortunate, the fact that this game was postponed. It was Burnley Spurs for this couple, right, who travelled almost 31 hours from Dallas, Texas, to watch the match. They say they were fuelled by coffee, cheese crackers, and more coffee. But I think it's fantastic, that, isn't it? How far have you travelled for an event for it to not go ahead? Certainly not as far as Dallas to Burnley. Although I did make the point earlier, if they're Spurs fans, they should be used to a lifetime of crushing disappointment by now, shouldn't they? But there you go. Cheeky little dig. As a Manchester United fan, it does not much better for me at the moment, is it? But do they breed them tougher up north, Andre?
Oh, coffee and cheese crackers in Burnley. It must be a Spurs fan then. Right? Basically, that's doner kebab and a can of special brew.
Yes.
You'll be absolutely fine. No, well, I have to say, you will remember when I say we were up north, we weren't up north together, but you'd see New Year's Eve, you know, sort of Toff's nightclub in Lee, you know, and the girls with the tiny mini skirts and whatever. And I remember there was Jimmy Carr joke where he said that he got accused of being gay in Newcastle for not wearing a coat.
Yeah.
I think actually, in the mind of a northerner, that could work.
Yeah. I do like it when about once or twice a year, the Mail and the Sun will send a photographer up to Newcastle or somewhere.
Or Aintree. Aintree. Did you see the girl with the tag on her?
And get them pictured stumbling out of a nightclub in the freezing weather. I mean, what do you make of that? Is that madness, or do you think that's a sign of a good, hard northern man?
I think good for him. There was a moment in the clip there where you could see in his face he knew he'd made a mistake. He couldn't back out at that point.
Yeah.
Looking at him, I respect him for sticking with it. I respect the bold decision of not putting a jacket on in the first place. The part of the story I'm most interested in, I want to know how many Spurs fans there are in Texas who regularly... Do they fly over regularly for the matches?
Well,
how does that happen?
Spurs is a massive club.
No, do you know the West Coast? Do you know Virgin Trains? I don't know if they still do it now. They've changed. Used to put extra trains on from London to Manchester for the Man United home supporters.
Yes.
They've got to get there from Chigwell, haven't they?
The Cockney Reds. The Cockney Reds. Are you a football fan or not at all?
No, not at all. But I have been to Newcastle, where the majority of the people seem to be wearing the Newcastle kit. But I did live with 6 northern girls when I went to Leeds Uni, and I'd go out in that coat, you know, the warm thing that people wear in the cold, and they'd be in tiny strappy dresses in January and not even teeth chattering.
I went to a debating competition at Leeds University and went to a local curry house called Passage to India. Never was a place more appropriately titled than that place. The following day it was a disaster.
Trey, we nearly got through. We nearly got through the show without you saying something like that, and then here he is. But no. Right, let's finish on one that's certainly very close to my heart. Sales of small wine glasses, this is a travesty, everyone, have risen by 13% in the past 12 months as pubs return to more modest measures, serving 125 millilitres as their standard serving, and get rid of the 250 millilitre servings altogether. So Brits are reportedly seeking out small glasses for the good of their health and well-being. Yeah, all right. This comes as research by Cambridge University revealed people tend to drink more when served larger glasses. Well, presumably that's because they are drinking more. And it's a good job that Cambridge there have really put that in. Is this the end of the large glasses of wine? Kelly, do you ever have a tipple?
Frequently have a tipple, yeah.
Right.
Especially over lockdown. Lots of tipples.
Do you think this is a good thing? Do you think we need a little bit of commercial nanny statism where we're being told, actually, no, we're not doing a large glass, you know?
Well, my husband says that I drink more in small glasses because I might drink it all in one.
Yeah.
so says far too much about my relationship. But I think that it says in this report as well that the behaviour psychologist said there's no actual evidence, but we think it would reduce drinking. So I don't know what she's basing that on. But maybe it's true. Maybe if they just stop making the larger glasses a bit cheaper.
Well, and we talk about North-South divide, Andre. I can't help but wonder as well, you know, when you go up north, you get a pint for £3. Down here, I paid $7.50 for one the other day.
Do you know what I do, right? I get my own car back from GBNews. Like, I just pay a driver and expense it. I always steal one of your mugs and then go to the 24-hour offie and drink it in the back of the car. Now, that is what I like.
Oh, grief.
Expert level.
This is fantastic.
Your drivers won't allow you to drink in the back of the car.
You know our security guard? Yeah, obviously not. Our security guard has a television in his room just out there, you know that. So I think he's might be checking you on the way out. Just very quickly, what do you think about this story? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think as a nation we need to drink less?
No. I think the only proper reaction to a story like this is to say, seriously, really, is this what Cambridge University are coming out with now? We've just come out of a pandemic. Just leave us alone. There's nothing wrong with having a drink. Why are we accepting it as a given that we need to drink less and we're just debating what the best way to get there is? I think we should be drinking more. I think that's a rational reaction to what's been happening in the world.
Well, I mean, you know...
Hey, men to that, brother. I assumed you'd be a bit of a lefty before I met you.
That's a resounding endorsement, of course. No, I was at Winter Wonderland yesterday, and it's fine, you know, it's great, it's a good day out, it's fine, but I ordered a pint, which was flat, and I could see the guy trying to zhuzh it up in the glass just to make it look like I had a head in it, and a glass of lukewarm wine, and it cost me £20 whole. I think maybe that's the reason why people, especially down south, are drinking a little bit less than people up north, potentially. But anyway, thanks very much for watching tonight, everybody. I hope you've been able to put up with me filling in for Mark Dolan, who lost his voice. Thankfully, I very much hadn't lost mine. But thank you to my wonderful panel of Jason Reed, Kelly J. Keane and Andre Walker. You're, of course, watching at home, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Dan Wootton will be back tomorrow night, and Mark Dolan, fingers crossed, returns on Friday. Take it easy, people.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.